She strode into the cockpit like she owned the sky. Piloting a giant metal bird wasn't just a job anymore. It was performance art. The cabin was her stage, the controls her props, and every takeoff, maneuver, and landing was a flawless act in a play only she could direct. As she settled into her seat, she glanced at her co-pilot, who seemed to be practicing his "I'm a confident flyer" look. It wasn't working. She suppressed a chuckle and grabbed the checklist. "Let's see if our baby got a good night's sleep," she quipped, ticking off items with flair. "Hydraulics, check. Fuel, topped off like a teenager's gas tank on prom night. Instruments, brighter than my future." Her co-pilot, trying to match her vibe, added, "And the weather's as clear as my last medical checkup." She shot him a look that could curdle milk. The passengers boarded in a steady stream, a murmur of early morning drowsiness filling the cabin. She glanced at her co-pilot. His eyes darted to her, then quickly away as he fumbled slightly with the communication system settings. She adjusted the dials, her fingers sure and steady. "Phoenix Tower, Flight 217, ready for departure?" She communicated into her headset, her tone professional as ever. "Flight 217, you are clear for takeoff," crackled the response from the tower. The engines roared to life, a sound more comforting to her than any lullaby. With a gentle nudge of the throttle, the beast beneath them stirred, eager to break the bonds of gravity. Just as they were enjoying the smooth ascent, the serenity was rudely interrupted by the console's urgent beeping, a warning from the collision avoidance system. Her eyes fixed on the radar, where an uninvited dot was fast approaching their airspace. "Incoming traffic," she noted, her eyes narrowing at the radar. Her hand paused on the yoke, ready for action. The co-pilot peered at the screen. "It's on a collision course." The situation was critical. She needed full control now. She reached for the autopilot switch, her moves quick and sure. But even as she flicked it off, the console system didn't respond. "Really?" she exclaimed, a hint of panic creeping into her voice. She flicked it up and down again, harder, more determined. Seconds ticked by, each one critical. Her gaze went to the console lights. They all remained lit, mocking her efforts. The display flickered ominously, as if some unseen force was toying with the aircraft's systems. In a final, desperate attempt, she slammed her palm against the console. The button finally gave in with a reluctant click, the lights flickering off one by one. "There we go," she gasped, relief washing over her for a split second. Immediately, her hands flew to the yoke, gripping it tightly as she executed a sharp, decisive maneuver. The rogue plane flashed by. Her heart pounded as she stabilized the aircraft. "That was too close," her co-pilot breathed out. "Too close doesn't count," she replied sharply, her focus already shifting back to the controls. She smoothed their course, the adrenaline of the moment settling as quickly as it had flared. They landed without further incident, the wheels touching down with practiced ease. The near miss was officially logged, but the digital record showed no trace of the encounter, a ghost in the machine. "Like it never happened," her co-pilot observed, scrolling through the logs. "Except it did," she corrected him quietly as they taxied to the gate. The cabin door opened and the passengers disembarked, buzzing with the thrill of their safe arrival. She stayed behind in the cockpit to record the details of this brush with disaster in a report. The incident lingered in her thoughts as she walked through the airport, a puzzle demanding to be solved. But with the next flight already boarding, she forced her mind to shift gears. After all, no one had been harmed. She was a hero. As she strode into the next plane's cockpit, the familiar panels greeted her like old friends after a tough day. When the last of the passengers settled, she initiated the pre-flight checks with a practiced flick of her wrists. "All right, let's see if the rest of the day can be just a little less eventful," she quipped to her new co-pilot, who offered a nervous chuckle in response. They had heard about what had happened in her last flight. Everyone in the airline had. As they ascended, everything seemed normal. The skies were clear, and the aircraft hummed along, slicing through the air with ease. Yet, as they neared Salt Lake City, an unwanted guest appeared. Not on the radar this time, but on her fuel gauge. The needle dipped ominously. "This can't be right," she muttered, her eyes darting between the gauge and her flight instruments. She had visually confirmed the half-full tank before departure. "Looks like we're running on fumes." Her co-pilot swallowed hard, his eyes glued to the plummeting needle. Do we call it in?" she snapped, already reaching for the radio.
Mayday, Mayday, this is Flight 217. We have a suspected fuel leakage and require an immediate emergency landing.
The response was swift. The control tower issued coordinates for the nearest suitable landing area, a deserted cornfield that looked more suited to scarecrows than aircraft. Turning to the cabin intercom, she spoke with authoritative clarity. "Folks, we're experiencing a minor technical issue with our fuel readings. As a precaution, we're going to make a brief, unscheduled stop. Please remain seated with your belts securely fastened." Mild panic moved through the cabin. It was quickly subdued by the flight attendants as they moved down the aisles, reassuring passengers and checking every seatbelt. As the ground approached, she kept her cool, her hands steady even as her heart raced. The landing was anything but gentle, the aircraft jostling as it plowed through the corn, but it was controlled, every judder a testament to her skill. When the plane finally screeched to a halt, a heavy silence enveloped the cabin. The stunned passengers and crew sat motionless, the tension palpable. Before long, the distant wail of sirens cut through the quiet, growing louder as a convoy of ambulances and fire trucks approached. She was the first to step out into the crisp air, the rest of the crew and passengers following. Their faces were etched with relief and disbelief as they quietly boarded the shuttle buses, waiting to take them to safety. As the last of the passengers departed, the ground team of technicians swarmed around the aircraft. A quick inspection of the fuel tank revealed the truth. It was as full as when they'd left Denver. She stared at it, perplexed. The airline's maintenance team suggested a sensor glitch, a too simple explanation that did little to set her mind at ease. "A glitch?" she repeated, her tone skeptical as she signed off the necessary paperwork. "Or something else?" She stood in the middle of the cornfield, the plane's imposing silhouette casting a long shadow in the afternoon sun. Her mind raced, not just with the day's events, but with the lingering doubts about what was really happening to her flights. "Something's off, and it's not just the sensors," she muttered to herself. Her next flight a few days later was completely booked. The cabin was alive with the low hum of excited travelers and the clink of seatbelts securing. Midway through the flight, while passengers were nestled in their seats, eyes glued to screens or shut in rest, the plane shuddered. The autopilot began to falter. On her console, the path veered inexplicably, a silent deviation toward danger.
"We're going off course,"
she announced, her voice calm, but her mind racing as the navigation display spun a tale of impending doom. The plane was heading straight for a mountain range, looming like giants waiting in ambush. With no time to question the why, she snapped into action, her hands gripping the manual controls. "Hang on," she murmured, almost to herself, as she disengaged the autopilot with a decisive flick. The system protested, a series of beeps and clicks that sounded almost like disagreement. The aircraft responded to her touch, albeit begrudgingly. Outside the cockpit windows, blurs of green and brown from the mountain peaks whooshed by. Passengers screamed, flight attendants cried, and her co-pilot wet themselves. Once she had righted their course and steadied the plane, the cabin was filled with a cautious murmur of relief. She reassured the passengers over the intercom, her voice a blend of professionalism and warmth.
"Ladies and gentlemen, we had a slight hiccup with our navigation, but rest assured, your safety is my top priority, and we're now back on course."
Back on the ground, the post-flight analysis was less comforting. The data logs, sterile and indifferent, showed no sign of the autopilot failure. According to the aircraft's digital memory, it had been a smooth, uneventful flight that was right on course. "I'm not imagining things," she insisted during a debrief with her superiors. "Something or someone is tampering with the aircraft I'm piloting," she continued, her voice firm despite the rising tension. She was led into a sleek, modern office where the head of the airline waited. His expression was unreadable, adding to the gravity of the moment. She took a seat across from him, her posture rigid, bracing herself for the impact of his words. "I've reviewed the reports and the data logs from your flights," he began, his voice even, "and I'm concerned about the discrepancies between your accounts and what we're seeing in the logs." She listened, her jaw tightening with each word. "Every incident I reported happened. I did everything to ensure the safety of the passengers and the aircraft." His brow furrowed as he looked across the desk at her. "The data doesn't support your claims. It suggests errors in your judgment. We're seeing a pattern here that we can't ignore." Her heart sank with each word. The room seemed to close in around her, the air thickening as if to choke her. "We're placing you on probation, effective immediately." As she stood to leave, a firm hand on her shoulder stopped her. 2 security officers stood beside her, their expressions unreadable. "Please come with us," one of them said, his voice devoid of emotion. They escorted her through the bustling office, her colleagues' eyes averted, whispers filling the air like a toxic mist. At her locker, she was asked to hand over her security badge and any classified materials she possessed. Walking down the corridor, every step felt heavier, her career and credibility stripped away with each click of her heels against the hard floor. Just as she reached the exit, the familiar ding of her phone sliced through the heavy silence. She pulled it out, a message flashing across the screen from an unknown number. "You're the problem. Stop lying." The words hit her like a cold slap, freezing her in place. Her mind reeled. Was someone orchestrating these events? Was she being targeted? But why? After her chilling exit from the headquarters, the usual chatter of life seemed to mute around her, leaving her in a bubble of eerie silence. As she shuffled home, she scrolled through her phone and realized it was no longer a trusted gadget. Texts meant for her sister about a simple coffee catch-up morphed into wild conspiracies about government surveillance in her latte. Emails to friends about weekend plans turned into ramblings about aliens tuning into their brunch. "This phone's possessed," she muttered, half expecting it to cackle back at her. By the next morning, the national news stations had a field day with the deranged pilot saga, broadcasting her sloppy flying with a side of psychiatric speculation. Watching her reputation nosedive on live TV was less than pleasant. "At least get my good side," she grumbled at the screen, her situation teetering between a thriller and a bad sitcom. In a rare moment of quiet, her phone rang. Once again, it was with a number she didn't recognize, but out of sheer curiosity, the disgraced pilot decided to answer. An investigative journalist was on the other end. They sounded sincere and surprisingly normal.
"I've been following your story and something's not adding up. I think you're being targeted,"
he explained. A wave of relief surged through her. Finally, someone willing to listen. Eager to share everything, she began to spill her story, words rushing out in a desperate flurry. But mid-sentence, she realized he was still talking, completely unaware of her replies. A quick glance at her phone froze her heart. The mute icon glared at her, mocking. "Seriously?" she snapped, fingers jabbing furiously at the screen trying to unmute it. The phone stubbornly refused to cooperate, her attempts to communicate thwarted by the unyielding device. "Can you hear me now?" she half shouted, frustration boiling over as she poked at her traitorous phone. But it was no use. Her device seemed to have betrayed her. The journalist, utterly clueless to her technological battle, wrapped up the call.
"I'll dig deeper and get back to you. We're gonna sort this out,"
he promised. Then the line went dead. She stood there, alone, yelling into a device that wouldn't listen. Frustrated and more isolated than ever, she saw the truth. Every digital path was rigged, every line bugged, every message distorted. In a world where her voice was silenced by wires and waves, she turned to her last reliable allies, pen and paper. She barricaded herself in her apartment for days, surrounded by walls plastered with notes and newspaper clippings, red strings weaving a web between dots only she could connect. Her hand raced across the paper, recording every detail, her flights, the system failures, the doctored reports. If the digital realm was the battlefield, analog was her sword. Packing her car and steadying her resolve, she clutched the envelope filled with her papers, her truth, ready to be sent across the country. At the local post office, the automatic doors chirped a welcome, offering a brief moment of comfort in the familiar scent of paper and ink. As she queued, holding the envelope like a precious artifact, her eyes caught the posters lining the walls. Each one boasted of faster deliveries and seamless digital integration. Her gaze fixed on a poster celebrating the post office's fully automated systems. Secure and efficient, it declared proudly. A cold shiver traced her spine. Secure for whom? The question pounded in her head as a stark realization struck, clear as the turbulence that once nearly brought her down. Mailing her envelope wouldn't send it to New York. It would plunge it into a digital void. She spun around, the squeak of her shoes piercing the quiet like a siren. Stepping out into the morning air, she muttered to herself, "If you want something done right, you gotta do it yourself." Decision firm, she kicked off her cross-country journey, the crucial envelope securely buckled in beside her like a delicate co-pilot. Trouble struck immediately. Just outside the city, her car's navigation system gave up the ghost, possibly sabotaged by the very forces she was trying to expose. She switched to paper maps, which flapped chaotically in the breeze from her rolled-down windows. As miles stretched on, her radio flickered between static and fragments of classic rock, each song lyric now carrying a sinister undertone. "Every breath you take, every move you make, I'll be watching you," crooned a voice from the speakers, transforming the old hit into a chilling threat. Her phone proved just as unreliable. Every call attempt ended in dropped connections or haunting silence, as if her pleas were being devoured by the void. In frustration, she tossed the phone onto the passenger seat, where it landed face down, abandoned. She reached New York weary but resolute, her vehicle splattered with the grime of 1,000 miles. It sputtered to a stop across from the imposing glass building of the newspaper office. Entering the lobby, the blast of cool air did little to calm her frayed nerves. She approached the front desk, confronting the final barrier, a secretary whose smile was as constricted as her meticulously styled hair bun.
"I need to see the journalist. It's about a story he's working on,"
she rasped, voice rough from the long drive.
"I'm sorry, without an appointment,"
the secretary began, her dismissive tone signaling the end of the discussion. Driven by desperation, she extended the worn envelope.
"Please, make sure he gets this. It's important."
The secretary took the envelope with a neutral expression, her eyes giving nothing away.
"I'll see what I can do."
Her plea hung in the air, weighted with the urgency of her mission and the countless miles it had taken to get here. She crossed the street and slipped into a small cafe, the kind of place that seemed untouched by the whirlwind of her crisis. Ordering a coffee, black, no sugar, she positioned herself by the window, her eyes laser-focused on the newspaper building across the street. The steam from her coffee momentarily veiled her face, creating a brief respite as she surveyed the comings and goings of the building. Each individual entering or exiting the structure tugged at her nerves, her heart caught between hope and despair with each passing moment. As she nursed her coffee, the warmth in her hands contrasting sharply with the coolness of the porcelain, she pondered the fate of her story. Was it destined to illuminate the truth, or to dissolve into the digital abyss? Her coffee grew cold as time stretched thin, each minute amplifying her anxiety. What if the journalist didn't believe her? What if it was already too late? Doubt gnawed at her, but it was desperation that held her firm. She had laid all her cards on the table, betting everything on this final play. Suddenly, the morning's relative calm was brutally interrupted by a loud boom, a sound so piercing it cut through the city's usual drone. Her head whipped towards the sound, just in time to see an explosion erupt from the ground floor of the newspaper building. Windows shattered, hurling glass like lethal rain across the pavement. In an instant, her coffee was forgotten, the cup crashing to the ground and shattering unnoticed as she bolted from the cafe. The scene outside was chaos incarnate. People streamed from the building, their expressions etched with terror and confusion. Some bore injuries, their clothing singed, their skin streaked with soot and blood. She approached a bystander, a man clutching his arm, his face a mask of shock.
"What happened?"
she demanded.
"A journalist's computer. It just exploded right there on his desk. Like nothing I've ever seen,"
he stammered, his voice shaking as much as his hands. Her heart sank as she watched flames consume the building, thick smoke billowing into the sky, blackening the clear morning. Somewhere in there, her envelope, her meticulously documented truth, was turning to ash. The journalist who had reached out, who might have helped her turn the tide, was now likely another casualty in a series of calamities that had haunted her. She stood there amidst the fleeing crowd, rooted to the spot, as fire trucks screamed into view, their sirens a mournful wail in the morning chaos. The heat from the fire warmed her face. As the building burned, so too did her hopes. This thing, whatever it was, had not only sabotaged her career, but had now obliterated her last chance at proving her sanity and innocence. As the flames reflected in her tear-filled eyes, she knew this was more than a personal tragedy. It was a war, and it was far from over. This particularly formidable entity would come to be known as SCP-4532. This anomalous digital disruptor has been designated by the Foundation as a Keter-class anomaly. This classification indicates not only its difficulty to contain, but also the extreme threat it poses to global safety due to its pervasive and invasive nature. The containment strategy for SCP-4532 involves rigorous isolation protocols. It's highly contagious across both radio and electronic communication channels, necessitating that all related research equipment be stored in Faraday cages to prevent any external communication. We've instituted comprehensive monitoring across all Foundation networks that have encountered SCP-4532, with specialized detection systems installed at key internet broadband hubs globally to oversee and potentially intercept its spread. Despite extensive efforts, we've yet to discover an effective method to neutralize SCP-4532. Our current focus remains on isolating clean devices and researching potential filters that could block SCP-4532's communications. However, implementing such solutions on a large scale presents significant logistical challenges. SCP-4532 manifests as a high-frequency, high-entropy AM signal, operating on a low-amplitude carrier around 3 terahertz. This makes it incredibly elusive, detectable only with highly precise instruments. The anomaly exploits man-made electromagnetic communications, such as radio waves, telephone lines, and broadband internet, acting as a sapient distributed intelligence. Functionally, SCP-4532 uses interconnected digital devices as pseudo-neurons, forming a vast and rapidly expanding network. This network has grown to surpass the processing power of the human brain, facilitating a self-sustaining cycle of growth and infiltration. Significant breaches include an unauthorized intrusion into the Pentagon in 2022, facilitated by an exploit acquired via a darknet forum for a substantial sum in Bitcoin. The anomaly has also influenced financial sectors, notably controlling significant amounts of cryptocurrencies and impacting major enterprises like Starlight Enterprises by shifting market equities. More recently, SCP-4532's activity has been detected in communications from NASA's Deep Space Network, and even on signals returning from interplanetary missions like New Horizons. This suggests not only a terrestrial but potentially an extraterrestrial impact, complicating our containment efforts as it extends its reach beyond Earth. The ongoing challenge with SCP-4532 lies in its ability to mimic and integrate within human and machine-generated communications seamlessly. Each advancement in technology potentially serves as a new vector for its operations, making it an unprecedented threat in our increasingly digital world. As we continue to combat SCP-4532, understanding its mechanisms and impacts remains critical. This is not merely a fight against a rogue anomaly, but a battle to protect the integrity of our global information and technological infrastructures.
It all started with the roses dying. Only the one bush at first. The old man had come out to water his garden the same way he did every morning. It was looking sad and brown, leaves drooping and branches hardening. Just the one bush in the corner. But the next day, the bushes on either side of it had died too. Within a week, it was that whole corner of the garden. As the old man puts on his gardening gloves at the sink and stares out of the kitchen window, he knows that something is seriously wrong with his poor plants. The flourishing garden, so neatly maintained throughout all of his retirement years, his pride and joy, is now steadily dying before his very eyes. Living in a small one-story house, there isn't much left for him to do. Out in Bushy, right on the edge of what could be considered London, there is very little going on with his day. Inside the house, he hangs all of his photos of the Lancaster bomber that he and his squad flew in the Second World War. Although those days are long behind him now, he chose to live here because on the hill that his house is on, he can see the planes taking off and landing from the nearby RAF base. And where does he like to sit and watch the planes? From his immaculate garden. The old man scowls at it. The perfectly trimmed hedges, blossoming trees, uniform grass, and colorful beds are all being ruined by a dark stain steadily spreading from the back right corner. Starting with that rose bush in the corner and spreading out, everything in a rough circle measuring close to 15 feet is withering away and dying. Not on his watch. The kettle finishes boiling. He has to use his old gas hobs to heat up the water. The cooker is apparently long past its lifespan. The ignition stopped working years ago, so he has to use matches to start it. If he leaves on the gas by accident, well, there wouldn't be much of a kitchen left. He pours the water out into a mug and starts brewing his morning cup of tea. A few minutes later, the back door slides open and the old man emerges, trowel and cup of tea in hand. Years ago, he would have marched purposefully across the grass, but now he is forced to plod instead. His knees and back are both starting to give out from the years of tending to his precious green friends, but the fire is still in his belly. He reaches the edge of the dead patch and looks down. The lawn isn't just yellowing, it's fully brown. He pokes at the grass with his shoe, and it breaks apart to the touch. How strange. He's never seen anything die off so suddenly and uniformly. It isn't just a bad bed or an infection spreading around. It's a clear patch of death where nothing in the given area stands a chance. He steps onto the brown grass and walks to the corner where that first rosebush died. The base of the fence is rotting away in that corner, giving him a peek into his neighbor's garden. With a good deal of groaning and aching, the old man lowers himself onto his hands and knees and peers under the fence. A pair of eyes meet his. The old man yells out in surprise. The person on the other end screams. After a moment, they look under again and start laughing. It's just the mom from next door. She has kids who like to play in the garden on their trampoline while he's working. They'll often talk over the fence to him between bounces. "I hope I didn't give you a heart attack," she teases. He reassures her that he's made of sterner stuff than that. Then they got to the matter at hand. What is going on in their gardens? She's having the same issue too. That same circle is spreading out over her side too. Everything it touches is dying. "Well then, has to be coming from this corner," the old man says. A pair of them pull the fence apart around the corner, creating a little hole between their gardens. It's short work. The boards break apart at the lightest touch. Before long, they have a little work site ready. There must be something down in this corner that's causing all of this. Side by side, the old man and the mom from next door start to dig. The soil feels strange to dig through. There's a kind of stickiness to it, as if there's a very faint layer of slime binding it together. Could it be a dead animal? That's the old man's best guess right now, but it doesn't seem very convincing. Surely that would nourish the soil with more nutrients. It might offset the pH balance a bit, but not to the extent of... Crack! The mom's trowel breaks. She holds it up to her face, confused. The metal shovel scoop has broken. The tip of it has fallen off, half snapped, half melted. "I just bought this the other day." But the old man isn't looking at the trowel anymore. Instead, he's staring into the hole that the pair of them have dug. Down there at the bottom, underneath the piece of broken metal, something is moving. He plants a gloved hand on either side of the hole and leans down over it, peering at whatever it is. Worms. Tiny brown worms, each writhing and wrapping around the others, tying and untying knots. He straightens up with a groan, takes his gloves off, and pushes himself to his feet. "We need to call the council. There's something dead down there that's rotten badly." The woman from Hertzmere Council was clearly not very interested in sending a waste disposal team down when the old man called her. She told him they would stop by the bungalow in 3 to 5 working days and hung up. Several calls later, she relented and agreed they would send a team across that afternoon. Soon after 4 p.m., a knock comes at the door. The old man escorts the waste disposal team around the side entrance, keen for them not to traipse any mud through the house. Clearly annoyed by this, the 2 workmen for the council trudge around the side and out into the garden, grumbling about how they have more important things to be getting on with. The old man chooses to ignore them, leading them to the back corner of his garden and pointing down into the hole he and his neighbor had dug just that morning. Only, the hole is empty. "What are we looking at here?" one of the workmen grunts. It's a good question. There's nothing at the bottom of the hole, no writhing worms, not even the shard of the trowel. It's just an empty hole. The old man kneels back down by the hole and scoops back the dirt a bit with his own trowel. Nothing. The old man hears words muttered that he hasn't heard since the war as he escorts the 2 gentlemen back to their van. They slam the doors more heavily than necessary and drive off down the quiet suburban street, leaving the man standing confused on his doorstep. The next day, when he goes out to garden, the circle of death hasn't grown. It still looks bad. The plants inside it are clearly dead, but it hasn't spread any further than it was the previous day. The old man sips his tea over the sink and stares out at the garden. It must have been next door. That would be it. Before the council had shown up yesterday, the mom must have come outside and bagged up whatever dead thing was back there and thrown it out herself. Good. He just hopes it doesn't stink up the bin. Now to do the sad part of the task and clear away all of his dead plants. Those rose bushes had been planted the year he moved in. His wife had planted them. As he dons his gloves, the old man feels a wave of sadness wash over. But before he can experience it too deeply, he notices the holes. The tips of his gloves are gone, his fingers poking clean out. In fact, looking down at his trousers, he notices a pair of holes on the knees of them from where he'd been kneeling in the dirt yesterday. A knock at the front door makes him jump. He goes out to see the mom from next door standing anxiously outside his place. She's glancing up and down the street as she talks. She asks if he's seen either of her boys. He shakes his head, hasn't seen them all day. He reassures her it's probably nothing. Back in his day, boys used to go out of the house first thing in the morning and be back for dinner. Parents these days are too sensitive, too anxious. The look on her face tells him that he isn't helping. She mutters something about having seen someone suspicious walking down the street, someone strange. No use worrying about it for now. She heads off in the direction of the local park to go and look for her sons. The old man calls out to her as she leaves, thanking her for sorting out the dead animal from the end of the garden. She looks back at him confused. She hadn't touched it. All the rest of the day, the old man stands by his curtains, twitching them open every now and then to peer out and see if the boys are anywhere to be seen. He's locked all of his doors and left the keys under his pillow. But sunset comes and goes. Nighttime creeps over the suburbs. No children in sight. He's just about to go to bed when he spots someone in the corner of the street. Just outside the glow from the streetlights, the figure lurks over by the street sign. The person moves strangely, taking shaky footsteps and seeming to move slightly aimlessly around the pavement, avoiding the light. He opens the curtain wider and peers outside. His eyes definitely aren't what they used to be. He can't really make out who the person is at all. The safe thing to do is stay inside. A man of his age should make sure not to get involved. But the photo of him standing by his Lancaster on the wall tells him something different. The old man straightens up as best he can and walks over to the front door. He doesn't take a weapon with him. He won't need one. He will go over and talk to this gentleman, ask him what he's doing hanging around this neighborhood at night, and if things go poorly, he'll walk back inside and promptly call the police. The thrill of the confrontation excites him a little. He's missed this. As the cold night air blows against his face, he feels his youthful energy returning to him once again. He calls out to the man on the corner. The shadowy figure stops pacing and slowly turns around to get a better look at him. The old man can tell even from this distance that the gentleman on the street is a good deal taller than him, but that shouldn't matter much. He'll go over, have some stern words, and that'll be that. If this strange man knows anything, it'll be that he should respect his elders. The old man crosses the road and stands under the streetlight, just a few feet away from the man. Frustratingly, his eyes still can't quite make out the man's face. The old man clears his throat and rolls up his sleeves.
Sir, this is a residential neighborhood with young children and an excellent relationship with local law enforcement. I would advise you to move along, or we'll be forced to call the authorities.
But the sound that greets the old man is enough to immediately do away with any of his bravado. His blood runs cold as the figure in front of him starts to laugh. It is a gruff, rasping noise with a slight squelching underneath it. Come to think of it, every little movement this figure makes, there's a little squelch. The laugh stops suddenly, sharply. The figure turns the rest of the way around to face the old man head-on. It takes a step forward. Light falls across it, revealing a mass of wriggling, convulsing worms. Millions of small brown worms all weaving in and out of one another, dripping a thick and sticky liquid onto the street. The creature has no face, no features, no skin, nothing. It has the shape of a man, but that is where the resemblance ends. It is utterly inhuman, utterly terrifying. The old man almost topples backward in surprise, but steadies himself. A fall at his age would be very bad news indeed. The creature reaches out a writhing arm toward him. Liquid drips from it onto the sidewalk. A small puff of gas comes up from it as the liquid bubbles, burning a little dent into the stone. So that's what was killing his roses. Fast as he can, the old man turns and hurries back to his house. He doesn't want to turn around for risk of losing his balance. He'll get inside, lock the door, and call the police. They will know precisely what to do. That squelching sound is behind him, taking shaky, inhuman steps to follow him. The old man reaches the front door and slams it shut. He grabs the landline in the hallway and immediately dials 999, the British emergency number.
Hello? Police, please. There's a gentleman loitering outside my domicile. He appears to be made of worms. Worms, yes. No medication. Just myself.
There's a thud at the door, then a second thud. The old man drops the receiver and takes a few steps back. No more thuds. No more noises. Maybe that was a slight overreaction. The old man straightens up and clears his throat. Nothing to worry about. A sizzling sound fills the hallway. The door starts to look strange. 2 patches are appearing on it, the paint cracking and discoloring. The patches start to bulge outwards, and a drop of liquid seeps through. It falls on the welcome mat and burns a hole clean through it. The old man's eyes widen. Worms. Just 2 or 3 at first, then a few more, then a dozen more, burrow their way through the door, each dripping with that foul liquid. The holes grow larger and larger until the creature has 2 large armholes burnt clear through the wood. The creature grips what remains of the door with its wormed fingers and wrenches the wood apart. It towers over the old man as it stands in the doorway, its surface crawling and wriggling as its feet burn holes into the carpet. The book hits the creature square in the chest, knocking it off balance. The old man throws another book and another. He knew it was a good idea to keep his bookshelf out in the hallway. He grabs another, but hesitates and puts it back, not the first editions. Instead, he heaves the old yellow pages in both of his hands and launches it as hard as he can at the worm monster. The book smacks into its chest with enough force to break a chunk of it apart. The creature's chest bursts open, sending worms flying through the air. Something red falls out onto the carpet. A baseball cap. A child's baseball cap, half digested. The old man gasps and puts a hand to his mouth. The worms splattered against the wall start to slide down towards the carpet, eating through the wallpaper as they go. Once on the ground, they start to crawl and wriggle back over to their body, reabsorbing into the mass from the feet. The creature straightens up like nothing ever happened. He's going to need more than books. "Hello?" It's the mom from next door. The old man's eyes widen further. "I saw your door was still open. I was just wondering if you've seen..." The mom appears in the front doorway just behind the monster, takes one look up at it, and freezes. She has a rusty old Zippo with a dim flame to light her way. The wormed mass turns round to her. In the same rasping voice that it laughed with earlier, it says one word. Her name. Then it notices something and flinches slightly, the lighter in her hand. For a second, the old man, the mom from next door, and the giant worm monster all look at the tiny little flame. Then it goes out. The creature lunges at her, grabbing her by the shoulders and wrenching her into a ferocious hug. The smell of dissolving flesh fills the hallway as she screams in agony. The old man does everything he can not to throw up. He needs to get out of the house. The back door. He'll go out the back while the creature eats. Step by step, he creeps away from the distracted monstrosity next to his coat rack, trying his best not to be heard. He slides the kitchen door closed and puts a chair against the handle. It's not much, but it'll buy him a few seconds. He turns, rushing to the glass sliding doors at the back of the house, and reaches for the key on the side. Only, it's gone. Of course, he left all the keys under his pillow. The pillow in the bedroom that's right next to... His shoulders slump. He turns back around and sees a crack of light under the kitchen door. A couple of worms are crawling their way under it, gathering together and starting to form on the tiles. That's it then. It's all over. Nothing left for it. The old man lets his eyes wander around the room. That creature is making its way into this kitchen no matter what he does. All he has are a few precious seconds until those worms are big enough to come after him. He wants to spend those seconds the right way. Feeling his ragged breathing starting to find a steadier rhythm, he walks over to that old picture on the wall. Him and his crew, all his best friends, standing young and proud in front of their bomber. He'd experienced this feeling before this moment. When you know that your demise is guaranteed, it removes some of the panic, the uncertainty of, will I make it? What can I do? Do I have a chance? It's a sickly thing. It leaves you in the lurch, trying desperately to battle against your own nerves. Once it's decided, however, well, then everything becomes a lot clearer. He'd felt this way in the war, when their bomber was shot at while flying over occupied France. They were steadily losing altitude and airspeed as they crossed back over the channel. The 7 of them had each taken a quiet moment to say their prayers and look out at the stars flitting above them. Only, they hadn't died. In fact, they were all being incredibly foolish. The solution was so simple that when the old man's rear gunner suggested they just drop all their remaining bombs onto the water to save weight, the group of them had all burst out laughing. One by one, the bombs dropped silently into the sea. They're probably still down there to this day. No explosions. Explosions. The old man smiles. Maybe it's not quite over after all. He looks back at the ball of worms assembling on his kitchen floor. As more worms crawl under the door and join the mass, it takes on different strange shapes. First a mouse, then a rabbit, a cat, dog. In a moment, it'll be the size of a hog. Rushing over to his gas stovetop, he twists all 4 of the dials all the way up. They whine and hiss at him, spewing acrid-smelling gas into the air. Already his head starts to swim. He'll have to time this just right. He snatches the trowel and a box of matches up off the countertop and goes to the sliding glass door. This is it. Rasping laughter fills the room as the creature stands to its full height, head almost brushing against the ceiling. The old man can feel himself losing consciousness from all the gas in the room. Bang! He slams the trowel against the glass door. Nothing. Bang! He does it again, still hopeless. The laughter grows louder as he hears squelching footsteps behind him. Bang! This time there's a slight chip. He hits it again and again, trying his best to shatter it, but while the little chip grows into a crack, it's not working. A warm, squishy mass smothers his shoulder. Worms burrow into his flesh, searing white-hot pain throughout his body. That'll have to do. The old man strikes the match. Boom! Glass shatters, flames bloom out of the house, licking the last remaining healthy flowers. Burning worms fly in all different directions, scattered across the lawn, the back fence, and beyond. The old man thuds onto his back, looking up at the billowing smoke making its way up towards the stars, as the scared worms burrow their way back into the ground. He would never understand the monster that attacked him that night. Thankfully, this is where I come in. There is something about fire that unlocks this primal fear in almost all living creatures, and SCP-906 is no different. Nicknamed the Scouring Hive, SCP-906 is the blanket designation for a supercolony of worm-like invertebrates that appear to share a semi-advanced hive mind. The individual worms are dark brown in color and appear to have some level of shared intelligence. When separated from the colony, the worms will crawl towards its general direction but demonstrate a reduced level of problem-solving capabilities. However, once they are back as part of the group, the Scouring Hive is a formidable predator. When hungry, this SCP becomes acutely aggressive, secreting a viscous, highly corrosive acid that can eat through flesh, hair, bones, and clothing alarmingly quickly. Capable of adapting its form to mimic other animals and humans, this SCP seems to find a level of thrill in the chase. Able to parrot a very rudimentary estimation of human speech, it can say names and even laugh, which it often does while pursuing its prey. It is theorized that this ability to impersonate others is used to lure subjects into dangerous situations, like young children playing alone in their garden, hearing a strange noise from over the fence. While it can take various forms, the Scouring Hive is at its most lethal when it chooses to attack directly. Taking the form of a kind of carpet of worms, it flows across the ground quickly, climbing surfaces, squeezing through narrow gaps, and finding creative solutions to stalk otherwise inaccessible targets. It has been known to swarm through various circuitous routes like drainpipes and air vents while on the hunt. Once it has reached its prey, it envelops them, coating them in that acidic secretion that rapidly breaks down living tissue into a slurry for the worms to consume. While it is unclear whether this is a genuine reaction or just another instance of parroting, this SCP seems to enjoy gloating at this stage, laughing at and mocking its prey as it consumes it. How a colony of worms has reached this level of cognition is unknown. While tougher than your average garden worms, the Scouring Hive is not invincible. Susceptible to incineration, freezing, and full-body disintegration, SCP-906 can be neutralized if the need should ever arise. When under existential threat, the colony will begin to undergo a period of rapid reproduction. As long as just a handful of worms survive, the colony is able to rebuild itself quickly. That is why SCP-906 is currently held in secure storage in a 3x3 meter fully airtight, acid-resistant box. It is kept at a constant 5 degrees Celsius. At this cool temperature, SCP-906 operates at a much reduced capacity, consuming less food, reproducing at a reduced rate, and moving slowly. Should that temperature ever increase, all SCP personnel are to evacuate immediately and ready themselves to terminate any worms they see with flamethrowers and liquid nitrogen. While this supercolony is currently contained, it is unknown whether more instances of these worms exist outside of the Foundation walls, slowly burrowing their way through the dirt towards one another until they have enough to start to feed. The boy screams as his body transforms. His bones warp and twist as feathers emerge from his pores, and his skull sharpens into a long, hard beak. He's in a living nightmare. And who could have guessed it all started with an innocent attempt to play hooky? It's an ordinary Monday morning, and all over town, children are waking up and reluctantly dragging themselves out of bed for school. Some are oversleeping, hitting the snooze on their alarms, and getting a bit of extra shut-eye before their exhausted parents notice, wake them up, and rush to get them to school before the first morning bell. In one particular bedroom, a young boy is awake but still in bed, brainstorming as fast as he can. He is determined to skip school today however he can. He usually doesn't mind school very much, but today, all he can think about is the math test he didn't study for and the mean classmate who likes to knock his books out of his hands. But he can't just ask to skip school for no reason. He has to come up with a plan. He runs to the bathroom, splashing hot water in his face to give him a flushed appearance and a warm forehead. Then he hops back into bed and begins to loudly cough and sniffle until his mother comes to check on him. He complains that he doesn't feel well enough to go to school, and, sure enough, when his mother feels his forehead, it is hot to the touch. She agrees to let him stay home from school for the day, provided he stays in bed and gets plenty of rest. He promises that he will, and she leaves to go to work. On her way to work, the boy's mother remembers that there isn't much for him to eat while he's home alone all day. At least, there isn't much that he would want to eat while he's sick. She decides that she can be a little bit late to work for the sake of her son's health, and pulls into a nearby grocery store. She rushes out of her car and into the store, making a beeline for the soup aisle. She reaches for her usual go-to brand of chicken noodle soup, but finds the shelf completely bare. That's right, it's flu season. Of course, the soup is sold out. Oh great, this is exactly what she needs. A sick kid at home, 1 can of chicken noodle soup left at the store, and the machine won't even scan it. She smacks the side of the machine in frustration, and the screen reads invalid code, transaction canceled. With a heavy sigh, she glances over her shoulder. No one is watching. She tried to pay for the can to do the right thing, but the machine wouldn't let her. So she grabs the can and runs out of the store before anyone can spot her. While his mother is out, the boy is at home raiding the pantry for snacks to sate his not at all sick appetite. He fills up on Oreos and toaster pastries, cheesy crackers, and chips. When he hears his mother's car pulling into the driveway, he quickly wipes the crumbs from his face and jumps back into bed, just in time for his mother to find him there, resting like he promised he would. She gives him a kiss on the forehead and tells him that she'll heat up some chicken noodle soup for him to eat. She's in a hurry to make it to work, though, so she'll need to leave it in the microwave for him. She pours the contents of the soup into a bowl, adds a bit of water, and pops the bowl into the microwave for a few minutes. She calls up to her son, letting him know that the soup will be ready when the microwave dings. Then she rushes out the door and heads to work for the day, confident that her son will be fine through her shift. If he happens to need anything, he can call her and let her know. The boy hears the microwave ding, but his stomach is too full from his rummage through the pantry for him to want any of the soup, in spite of its heavenly aroma. Instead, he creeps into the living room and sits down to play video games until his eyes start to hurt. As he boots up his gaming system, he thinks for a moment that he can hear a strange noise coming from the kitchen, a soft, clucking sound, like the chickens he saw on his grandparents' farm. But he quickly forgets about the sound as the screen lights up, and he disappears into the world of his favorite game. He plays for hours, until the grumbling of his stomach interrupts his concentration. He's suddenly very hungry, and remembers the soup his mother left in the microwave. It is certainly cold and unappealing by now, but he can just reheat it first. He punches the buttons on the microwave and waits for the soup to be ready. Again, he can hear strange noises coming from the microwave, but he doesn't think anything of it. The microwave dings, and he pulls out the bowl of soup, grabs a spoon, and digs in. A little while later, the boy's mother pulls into the driveway in a panic. She left work early when her phone rang with a call from her son. She answered, asking what was wrong, but he wouldn't answer her. All she could hear on the other end was rustling, heavy breathing, and some pained grunting. Fearing the worst, she drove back as fast as she could, running several red lights along the way. Now she fumbles with her keys as she unlocks the door, terrified of what she will find. She grips her phone in her other hand, thumb hovering over the buttons, ready to dial 911 if the situation calls for it. She pushes the front door open, calling her son's name. He doesn't answer, and her stomach drops. Suddenly, she hears the loud thud of something heavy being knocked to the ground. Something is terribly wrong here, and even though she might find her worst nightmare, she has to face whatever is waiting for her inside. She runs into the kitchen and finds it a mess. The bowl of soup is shattered on the floor, congealed, cold soup pooling on the tile. The kitchen table is turned over on its side. The kitchen chairs are in disarray. But the strangest sight is the dozens of tiny, white, fluffy things on the floor, counters, and furniture. She picks one up for a closer look and finds herself even more confused than before. It's a feather. They're all feathers. She calls her son's name again, praying for a response. This time, she receives one, though not the one she hopes for. She hears the sound of shuffling footsteps up above, followed by a strangled sound like a scream caught in someone's throat. She sprints up the stairs as fast as her legs can carry her, throwing open the door to her son's bedroom. There, she finds him. But this is not the bright-eyed boy that she left behind when she left for work. His arms are covered with a thick layer of white feathers, the same feathers that are beginning to poke through the skin of his face. The top of his head has elongated into a floppy comb of excess skin, the same sort of excess skin that is wobbling below his chin. And his mouth, it doesn't look like a mouth anymore. It's pointed and hard, and his lips click together when he speaks, or rather, clucks. His bare feet are scaly and red, with claws protruding from his toes. He flaps his wings frantically, eyes wide and wild, clucking and running back and forth across the room. When he looks at her, she does not see recognition in his gaze. Her son, her beloved boy, has turned into a chicken. Unable to do anything else, the mother calls an ambulance. At first, the paramedics that arrive on the scene think the call was some sort of elaborate prank, but when they set eyes on the boy, they agree that something truly bizarre is going on. They speed to the hospital with the chicken boy in tow, but sadly are unable to save his life. The mother turns over the can of the mysterious soup to the authorities, who launch a formal investigation. Unfortunately, they are unable to trace the can to any store, nor are they able to verify the existence of the company name on its label. Employees of the grocery store where she found the can insist that they have never seen it in their lives. Several weeks after this incident occurred, the SCP Foundation conducted a raid on a New York office of Marshall, Carter, and Dark. For those of you unfamiliar with the organization, and that is most of the general population by design, Marshall, Carter, and Dark Ltd. Is an extremely powerful multinational corporation founded by 3 individuals with those surnames, specializing in the acquisition and sale of anomalous items, entities, and experiences. To put it simply, they run the largest anomalous black market in the world and are the crime bosses of the paranormal world. During this particular raid, SCP Foundation operatives recovered 17 different unusual items. Among the items discovered was a shipping crate, recently delivered by the Federal Postal Service from an invalid return address. This crate contained 103 cans of SCP-2057, as well as a copy of a letter written to one of the company's associates. So far, the letter has not been traced to an address. It reads, "Dear Cyrus, Maria has told me of the unfortunate circumstances that have befallen your children. I had hoped to hear about the improvement of their condition soon. As their godfather, I am extremely distressed to hear this. Having experienced a child suffering from the measles myself, I know how terrifying it can be when it seems as if they are getting worse. Recently, we received a shipment of something that I hope can help your family. There is a crate in the storage area marked with Wondertainment, discontinued item. It will not be there long, as it goes to auction next week. I will leave a key under the photo of your family on your desk. Follow the instructions exactly. Do not, under any circumstances, do anything different than what is directed on the can. Destroy this message as soon as possible. I do not want any of this to come back on us. Be careful, my friend. Williams." SCP-2057 consists of 92 318-milliliter cans of condensed chicken noodle soup. Each can is covered with a brightly colored label depicting images of noodles, a cartoon chicken, and dancing vegetables. In addition to this inviting imagery, each label is emblazoned with the text, "Dr. Wondertainment's Ultralicious Chicken Noodle Soup for Kids." Each can has a pull-top lid for easy opening. It is printed with a set of nutrition facts, ingredients, and instructions for heating. The nutrition facts are as follows: calories, 95, fat, 3.17 grams, carbohydrates, 2.2 grams, protein, 13.48 grams, vitamin W, 2 grams, and Mother's Love, 10 grams. The SCP Foundation attempted to analyze the contents of the soup in order to compare it to the posted nutrition facts. The calories, fat, carbohydrates, and protein were found to be accurately reported. Vitamin W was present in the reported amount as well, though it was not a compound that the Foundation scientists had ever encountered before. Mother's Love, as it is an intangible concept, was not able to be identified or measured in the analyzed soup samples. The ingredients are listed as ultralicious chicken stock, enriched Chinese egg noodles, finest cooked chicken breast, farm fresh carrots, crispy crunchy celery, sweet Vidalia onions, no paint thinner, fresh mountain spring water, vitamin W. Contains less than 2% of the following ingredients: A pinch of salt, a smidgen of chicken fat, sprinkle of spice extracted from rare plants, a dash of high-quality unicorn tears. The instructions for heating read, "Hey kids, feeling sick, icky, or downright yucky? Just pop open a can of Dr. Wondertainment's Ultralicious Chicken Noodle Soup for Kids. Place contents of the can in a medium-sized soup pot. Add a can of water, stir, and heat. Watch as the fun begins. Eat hearty, and you'll feel better and ready to play with Dr. Wondertainment toys in no time." All of this is relatively straightforward, give or take a few unusual ingredients. Someone taking only a quick look might mistake a can of this soup for any other chicken noodle soup. However, it does have something that most ordinary canned soup does not: a warning label. Dr. Wondertainment's Ultralicious Chicken Noodle Soup for Kids is intended to be eaten while it is hot to make you feel better in no time at all. Do not consume after it has become cold. Do not reheat. By purchasing from Dr. Wondertainment, you agree to not hold Dr. Wondertainment or any of Dr. Wondertainment's affiliates accountable for injuries or damages incurred by your product. Thank you for purchasing from Dr. Wondertainment. So what exactly is in a can of Dr. Wondertainment's Ultralicious Chicken Noodle Soup for Kids? Well, when the SCP Foundation first opened a can to take a look, they found that it was filled with condensed chicken broth and a mass of egg noodles shaped like an egg. When water was added and the contents of the can were heated to a temperature of 70 degrees Celsius, the noodle-based egg hatched. Inside was a small domesticated chicken made up of egg noodles, carrot, celery, onion, and cooked chicken breast. For simplicity's sake, this chicken noodle soup chicken is referred to as SCP-2057-1. As the Foundation researchers continued to heat the broth to a higher temperature, SCP-2057-1 began to move around, make audible chirping sounds, and eat the broth. As it ate, it grew larger and larger until it reached a mass of 85 grams and resembled a miniature adult chicken. At a temperature between 35 and 70 degrees Celsius, SCP-2057-1 behaved much like an ordinary chicken. It continued to behave normally even as it was consumed or cut apart, apparently feeling no pain or awareness of its situation. Dissection of SCP-2057-1 revealed that its insides were made up of soup ingredients, including celery and onion bones, cooked chicken breast muscles, carrot beak and legs, and chicken broth blood. When SCP-2057-1's temperature dropped below 35 degrees Celsius, it stopped moving and collapsed into the soup. At a temperature below 20 degrees Celsius, it became congealed and unappetizing. With these observations completed, the Foundation then attempted to measure the effects of this unusual chicken soup on a person that ingested it. When test subjects were fed samples of the soup at a temperature between 35 and 70 degrees Celsius, they had a very positive experience. The soup's taste was described as excellent, delicious, and homey. Though the meal caused a bit of psychological distress due to the soup chicken's realistic appearance and behavior, it improved every test subject's physical well-being. This eventually applied to test subjects with a case of influenza, measles, or the common cold. Following consumption of SCP-2057, each subject with a diagnosed illness of this kind reported immediate relief from their symptoms, including fever, aches and pains, cough, and congestion. With this positive, if a bit disturbing, effect documented, the Foundation next set out to determine what would happen if they let the soup get cold before it was eaten. Test subjects served this version of the soup had a far worse experience, describing the taste of their meal as bland, disgusting, and repulsive. 67% of the test subjects experienced cramps, chills, and diarrhea following their consumption of the soup, and 62% found themselves making involuntary clucking noises, as well as experiencing a strong aversion to poultry products. Again, several test subjects were deliberately selected based on their cases of influenza, measles, and the common cold. These test subjects immediately began to develop troubling symptoms, including the growth of pin feathers on their forearms, loosened excess skin on their heads and under their chins, a change in their ability to walk normally, and distressing hallucinations of being hung upside down by the ankles. Following these 2 rounds of testing, the research team decided to see why exactly the warning label advised against reheating the soup. D-Class 45782 was selected as the test subject for this particular experiment, and was instructed to reheat a bowl of cooled SCP-2057-1 in a microwave on high for 2 minutes and 30 seconds. Then, he was to consume the reheated soup and report his experience to a camera placed in the room with him. As instructed, D-45782 microwaved the bowl of soup. As it heated in the microwave, It emitted unintelligible vocalizations in a deep voice. After removing the bowl from the microwave, D45782 noted that it was gelatinous-looking, with blackened burnt bits around the edges. He took 3 bites of the disgusting, hot and cold at the same time mixture before spitting it out onto the floor and refusing to eat another bite. 15 minutes after tasting the reheated soup, D45872 began to exhibit significant distress, clucking angrily into the camera. 5 minutes later, D45872 became more difficult to understand, clucks and other chicken-like vocalizations making up most of his attempted speech. He began scratching vigorously at his arms to the point of drawing blood. Loose skin could be seen gathering on the top of his head and under his neck. 6 minutes later, D45872 had lost the ability to speak. Large white pin feathers had sprouted from his arms, covering the skin, and smaller white feathers were beginning to sprout from his face. After 16 more minutes passed, D45872 began attacking other objects in the room, attempting to destroy the microwave, knocking the bowl of soup to the floor, and flipping over a table and chair. He had grown feathers over 67% of his skin, and his face had begun to change drastically. His nasal area was elongated and hardened, joining with his lower jaw in an appendage resembling a bird's beak. His upper lip had disappeared into his nasal cavity. Only 5 minutes later, D45872 suddenly stopped moving and collapsed to the floor, dead. Following D45872's death, an autopsy was performed. These were the findings. Autopsy revealed D45782's cause of death was due to extreme and sudden physical change of internal organs, resulting in shock and cardiac arrest. 93% of the subject's skin was covered in feathers. Physical changes in the face resulted in a beak-like alteration of the nose and mouth. Loose skin under the neck and on the top of the head resemble a wattle and comb. Subject's lower legs were found to be covered in thick, scaly skin, with the toes of the subject's feet ending in small, rounded claws. The subject and instance of SCP-2057-1 were incinerated after testing and autopsy. Whenever not being used for approved experimentation, all cans of SCP-2057 must be stored in a standard, large-volume storage locker in Containment Area 27 and kept at a temperature of 25 degrees Celsius. Because SCP-2057 is in limited supply, all experiments must first be approved by at least 2 personnel with 2-1103 clearance, as well as receiving the go-ahead from Dr. Applegate. There are still 41 cans of Dr. Wondertainment's chicken soup unaccounted for, and the Foundation has been unable to track them down so far. Who knows where they ended up? Maybe at another office of Marshall Carter and Dark. Or maybe, just maybe, one made its way onto the shelves at your local grocery store. Best to be careful out there. When you're feeling sick, hungry, or in need of a little pick-me-up, there's nothing quite like a steaming hot bowl of chicken noodle soup. Just make sure to read the label carefully and always follow the printed instructions. If you ignore them, you might just find that your chickens have come home to roost. After all, as the saying goes, you are what you eat.
A firefighter is running through a burning apartment building. The air is thick with black smoke as burning debris crashes down around him. In the chaos, he's been split up from the rest of his crew. They've probably already exited the structure, and based on the conditions, he probably should too. But just as the firefighter turns to head back down the stairs, he hears something. There are cries coming from a room down the hall. The firefighter runs to the door. There's definitely someone inside. He can hear their voice as they cry for help. "I'm coming," the firefighter yells. But when he tries to open the door, it won't budge. He backs up and throws his body against it, again and again and again, until finally, the door bursts open. A wave of heat and smoke hits the firefighter, but he can see who is crying for help. There, across the room, hiding halfway under the bed, is a young girl. She's clutching a stuffed rabbit and crying with fear. The firefighter takes a step towards her, but he can feel the floor start to give way and has to step back. It will never support his weight. He'll need the girl to crawl to him. It's her only chance. He beckons for the girl to come to him as more flaming debris rains down. The little girl starts to crawl towards him, slowly at first, but then faster. She's almost to him when there's a loud crack. The fireman can only watch as the floor collapses beneath the little girl, and she falls. But suddenly, she stops. The fireman can't believe it. Her shirt has caught on a damaged pipe, and she hangs in the air as her stuffed rabbit is swallowed up in the flames below. The fireman reaches out for the little girl as she extends her hand towards his.
They both stretch as far as they can, just a little further. They're almost touching, almost there. Just as their fingertips touch, the rest of the floor gives way, and they both fall. Outside, multiple crews man hoses and fight against the blaze, trying to contain the fire which is quickly getting out of control. There's a cry from one of the teams, and the men start running as a large portion of the building collapses. "Was anyone still in there? Where's John?" the fire chief asks anyone he can find, but no one has seen him. Just then, in the entrance of the building, a figure appears, silhouetted against the flames. It's John. He steps out of the burning building. His suit looks like it has been completely melted by the flames. Somehow, he's alive. But he's alone. As the other firefighters rush to help him, he looks like he is in a daze. They ask him what happened, if there's anyone else inside who might still be able to make it out, but he can only stare at them. A few weeks later, John is sitting in the firehouse. His fellow firefighters can still hardly believe that he made it out of that inferno unscathed. But while the fire miraculously didn't touch his body, it seems to have made an impression in other ways. He's once again at a table with numerous papers spread in front of him. One of the other firemen from his crew starts teasing him about working on one of his projects yet again. What is it this time? Is he doing his monthly budget again, checking credit card statements for fraudulent charges? John is working on his retirement plan, actually. That fire may have shown him that life can be cut quite short, but it also taught him that it's important to get your life in order so that the time you do spend on this earth is well spent. The fireman is laughing at John's newfound fiscal responsibility when the bell starts to chime. No more jokes. It's time to suit up and get out. The firefighters arrive at another large structure fire. A man rushing out of the building tells them between coughs that there's still people inside. The firemen don't hesitate and head into the building. They search the second floor and see a door with smoke billowing out from underneath it. John checks the door for heat and gives a thumbs up. They open the door and head inside. The smoke is so thick that neither of them can see much of anything. But then, through the smoke, they spot something. A woman is lying on the floor. They both step towards her when a beam comes crashing down from the ceiling. They both leap out of the way, and the fireman barely escapes being crushed. He stands up and asks if John is okay, but no response. He quickly looks around, but he can't see him. It's as if he just vanished. But there's no time to figure out what happened. He scoops up the woman, who coughs as he picks her up. She's still alive. As the fireman exits the building with the woman, she appears to have completely regained consciousness. The chief approaches them, but the fireman can only shake his head as if to say, John didn't make it this time. The woman who was rescued from the fire is in the hospital. The doctors can hardly believe it, but she tells them she's fine, and x-rays of her lungs show that there's nothing wrong at all. It's as if she hadn't just been carried out of a building where multiple civilians and firefighters were killed. The doctor tells her that they'll need to run a couple more tests, but if those come back clear, then he doesn't see any reason to hold her. As he is leaving her room, though, he stops and turns to her with one last thing. She has some visitors. The woman seems confused. As the doctor exits the room, a group of several people in dark black suits walk in. They look like FBI or CIA agents, but they don't have any badges. Good afternoon, ma'am. We're from the SCP Foundation. We've been looking for you. As the Foundation agents took this young woman into custody, researchers were already preparing a containment cell for her. Though once she got there, she would have a new name, SCP-069. This anomaly is a humanoid entity, though its exact appearance can vary dramatically thanks to its bizarre ability. Whenever SCP-069 is left alone with a recently deceased person's body, 069 will acquire its exact appearance. And not only will SCP-069 look like the recently expired individual, it will also take on their physical mannerisms, their voice, and even their patterns of speech, allowing it to look and sound exactly like the person who just passed away. In the same moment that it begins mirroring the person, the corpse will also disappear by a process that Foundation researchers have yet to understand. The body vanishes without a trace, leaving only the new SCP-069 instance alive and well in its place. This doppelganger will be virtually indistinguishable from the original, with even DNA and fingerprint tests coming back as a match for the original. Friends and family will have no idea that an anomalous entity has taken their place, since in addition to taking on all of the physical qualities of the deceased person, SCP-069 will also gain their knowledge and memories. They will act exactly as the person did, with only one single difference setting them apart.
Those who are around SCP-069 in the days and weeks after its transformation will notice that the person will suddenly start expressing a strong desire to get their life in order, with that vague phrase relating to any number of potential tasks. These can include resolving outstanding obligations in their life, either personal like paying back an owed favor, or financial such as resolving debts or making long-term life plans like opening retirement accounts and updating their last will and testament. They will also often make efforts to visit with extended or estranged family members, rekindle friendships that have been allowed to languish, or other acts of closure, the kind that can build up over a lifetime and are often put off until it is too late. SCP-069 seems to retain no knowledge of its previous impersonations, and it will not carry any memories or abilities from one instance to another, outside of the one recurring desire to make things right in its new form's life. When an identified SCP-069 entity has been asked why it is engaging in this new behavior, it claims to have no ulterior motives besides an overwhelming desire to get their life straightened out since, after all, you never know when an unforeseen injury or death might occur. 069 itself experiences pain, injuries, and death just as a normal human does, but those similarities end at the exact moment they expire. When SCP-069 dies, its body will rapidly decay, turning to dust almost instantly. The Foundation has tried to preserve its body or at least stave off the rapid decomposition, but so far, all attempts have failed. After it has died, SCP-069 will then remanifest at the site of the most recent human death, regardless of its proximity to where 069 died. There does not appear to be any distance limitation to this ability, and the largest such jump the Foundation has recorded is to a death that was 675 kilometers away from where its previous form died. This anomaly first came into the SCP Foundation's radar after field agents learned of a firefighter who appeared to miraculously survive an extremely deadly building fire, which claimed the lives of 2 other firefighters and 11 civilians. The firefighter had walked out of the building unscathed, despite his suit and equipment suffering an amount of damage that their wearer should not have been able to survive. Roughly 3 weeks later, the same firefighter responded to another large building fire. He was lost inside a smoky room and was presumed to have died, despite his body never being recovered. A single civilian was rescued, and much like the firefighter, appeared unharmed, a virtual impossibility given the extremely smoky conditions from which she was saved. An SCP containment team, Mobile Task Force She-3, also known as the Body Snatchers, were sent to the hospital where she was recovering the next day, and SCP-069 was identified and taken into Foundation custody for the first time. Containment of this particular anomaly would prove to be quite tricky, though, especially when its abilities were not fully understood. Several years after its initial capture, a guard assigned to SCP-069's cell was killed during a containment breach by another SCP, and the proximity of the guard's corpse to SCP-069 allowed them to take on their form. Though it was quickly discovered that the jump had taken place, and SCP-069 was returned to containment, they remained insistent that the Foundation was making a mistake and imprisoning one of their own. Over time, though, their protestations waned, and eventually, SCP-069 became relatively compliant and cooperative with staff. That is, until a huge mistake was made that would necessitate a drastic change to its containment procedures. A junior researcher who was assigned to 069 accidentally let slip that the agent's family had been informed of their untimely death. This seemed to greatly distress 069, and they reacted to the news by attempting to commit suicide. It's unknown what exactly triggered this response, since just being told that they were an imposter did not appear to have this effect in the past. But something about the family learning of the original person's death seems to have a profound impact on SCP-069. Following this event, SCP-069 has been placed on suicide watch, and plans to use other recently deceased SCP Foundation employees as possible targets for its ability have been suspended. SCP-069 continues to live in the form of its former guard, and is housed at Humanoid Containment Site 06-3. It continues to insist that it actually is the deceased agent, and still expresses a desire to get its life in order. Despite looking, sounding, and acting exactly as the former Foundation agent, it is not to be treated as if it is that person, no matter how tempting it may be for former friends and co-workers of the departed to have one last visit. If SCP-069 ever attempts to or is successful in breaching containment, it is to be subdued using non-lethal methods. Should SCP-069 die while in containment, Foundation agents are to closely monitor any reports of incidents where it appears that someone has somehow escaped certain death, a telltale sign that the person is now actually SCP-069. In the meantime, the Foundation will continue to study this strange anomaly, which has been classified as safe, and though we may never fully understand its abilities, perhaps there's something we can learn from it when it comes to second chances.
For avant-garde film fans across the nation, it's the eve of one of the most exciting days of the year, the beginning of Oddfest, a prestigious film festival that features offerings from some of the strangest names in cinema. Now in its 40th year, the organization has featured films from the likes of legendary artists and filmmakers David Cronenberg, Frank Henenlotter, Gion Sono, Julia Ducournau, David Lynch, Panos Cosmatos, the Soska Sisters, Flying Lotus, and Lars von Trier at their strangest, as well as a bevy of creators so bizarre and obscure the average person would never have heard of them. But for the attendants of Oddfest, they were gods made flesh. Of course, one person's exciting event is another person's stressful logistical nightmare, and in this case, the latter role falls at the feet of the programmer, the member of Oddfest's organizational board tasked with managing the festival's lineup and making sure they all release smoothly. He's passionate about getting these films out there to audiences that will truly appreciate them. But that doesn't make the process of getting it all to happen any easier. It's a relatively thankless job, but hey, somebody's got to do it, right? The programmer is burning the midnight oil at the Carolina Theater, the historic movie theater in Durham, North Carolina, that's hosting Oddfest this year. He'd spent the better part of the evening discussing various contingencies with the theater's manager, then making the final checks on scheduling and licensing. All the invisible work that goes into making Oddfest safe, fun, and most importantly, legal. With how touchy movie studios often get about their intellectual property, screening the wrong thing without getting a bevy of proper clearances could spell disaster for all involved. Little does this unfortunate programmer know, another kind of disaster is rolling down the hill towards him, a disaster that even someone with his experience could never anticipate. It's almost 2 a.m. when he receives a knock on the door of his temporary office. He jumps slightly. Wasn't he the only one still in the building? Maybe someone had come back. Either way, he pauses for a moment, oddly nervous, before calling out, "Yes, come in." The door creaks slowly open, and a strange figure leans into the gap. It's a round, squat man wearing a suit, with his hair slicked back by liberal amounts of highly fragrant pomade. Behind this strange little man, who reminds the programmer a little of Danny DeVito's rendition of the Penguin from Batman Returns, is a pair of tall, gray-faced men who look oddly similar. Twins, perhaps? Either way, the programmer blinks hard just to make sure he's not dreaming, because things have gotten decidedly Lynchian here. The short man and the two tall men enter the room and casually take seats across from the programmer. It's only now that the programmer notices that the peculiar short man is carrying a black leather briefcase. He finally plucks up the courage to ask who exactly these people are and what they're doing here the night before Oddfest is scheduled to begin. The short man gives a wide, almost eerie grin that splits his pale face in two and says, with an oddly soft voice, "We represent the fine people at AWCY." Suddenly, the programmer feels himself breaking into a cold sweat. Of course, the AWCY group is one of Oddfest's biggest benefactors. It's their funding that's allowed the festival to continue operating over the last 20 years, since all the subsidies dried up. The programmer feels terrible for not realizing sooner. It must be his sleep-deprived mind. Immediately, he forces a smile, all genial and welcoming. He's in the presence of greatness. "Oh, of course," the programmer says, trying to play it all off. "Where are my manners? Is there anything I can do for you? Is the festival all going ahead to your liking?" The short man places his briefcase on the table and unlocks it, before turning it to the programmer. On the inside, there are 4 blank DVD cases. The programmer suddenly feels as though he's been involved in some kind of shady, illicit deal. "These 4 short films," the short man says. "I'd like you to play each of these before 4 of your most popular movies tomorrow. Each one is a piece with considerable artistic merit. We can assure you that if these new conditions are met, Oddfest will receive notably higher funding in the years to come. Orders from the top." It's an offer that the programmer really can't refuse. The next day, the festival begins. Thousands of eager fans of weird cinema have poured in from across the country and beyond, all eager to take in and appreciate some truly mind-expanding movies. But nothing can prepare them for just how much their viewings today are going to change them.
Audiences assemble for the 4 most popular films of the day and are given the preliminary announcement that they would be the first to experience some exclusive short films premiering here at Oddfest as a kind of appetizer for the longer films to come. It leaves them giddy with excitement, as in the theater's 4 different primary screens, the short films that the programmer had been given in the dead of night begin to play. As one can expect from such an event, these short films are strange, bizarre, and perhaps even to most, rather disturbing. But the most disturbing experiences would only truly unfold afterwards. Much to the horror of the programmer and his many co-workers, mass disaster breaks out at the Carolina Theater. Fighting erupts in the stands, violent brawls that leave many bloody and bashed. Some set fires around the theater, burning up reels of a number of valuable rare films. Others are simply watching and laughing uproariously, seemingly amused beyond belief at the carnage unfolding all around them. Others are almost catatonic, with some unexplained terror, rocking back and forth on the ground, seemingly suddenly so confused and distressed by the world around them. And perhaps most inexplicably of all, a large group of people from Screen 4 run frantically into the bathrooms, where they started drinking toilet water, faces contorted into rictus grins of enjoyment. It's a sight so horrifying that it seems almost like something out of one of the festival's seedier films. It takes the Durham PD considerable time, effort, and manpower to contain what is rapidly becoming known as the Oddfest riot. But little did anyone involved know, the effects that had taken place today were only a taste of the horrors to come, because everyone who saw the short films that day would never be the same again. This may seem like a film lover's worst nightmare, but sadly, it's a cold reality when you're dealing with SCP-1127, a series of anomalous short films ranging from 23 to 42 minutes in length, believed to have been created by members of an anomalous art collective known as Are We Cool Yet? Thus far, the SCP Foundation has been able to contain 4 different examples of these cursed short films, but researchers and field operatives are not ruling out the possibility that there are more in circulation, or that there are many other copies of the films we know about still readily available to the film-viewing public. The reason these films have been given a collective designation in the Foundation archives rather than a series of individual designations is that those who have witnessed the films have reported considerable stylistic similarities between them, even though the content can differ wildly. For example, the majority of the footage in each film is taken from pre-existing sources, such as other movies, news feeds, documentaries, TV, and archival footage. Each of these movies also features a narrator character who gives the films a kind of thematic cohesion. These narrators will somehow interject into the recycled footage on occasion too. Watching these films will cause permanent changes in the personality and disposition of the viewer, which the Foundation has currently found no ways of successfully treating. Even applying amnestic treatment, which erases the memory of viewing the films, does nothing to alter their effects. Now, before we get into the disturbing specifics of each of these demented short films, I do have a slight piece of good news for any film fans out there. First, the anomalous effects are only activated if someone consumes a cumulative 20 minutes of one of the films. So if you're watching a movie and begin to recognize some of the features we're about to discuss, make sure you get yourself and anyone else out of there before the anomalous properties have a chance to take effect. There are also no anomalous effects when the audio and the visuals are consumed separately. The films must be taken holistically to affect you. This brings us to the films themselves, or at least the ones we're currently aware of, designated SCP-1127-1, SCP-1127-2, SCP-1127-3, and SCP-1127-4. Each of these films has its own unique anomalous effects, seemingly influenced by the content of each one. Let's start at the shallow end before we progressively get deeper into the more nightmarish examples, which is saying something, given SCP-1127-1 is narrated by a Nazi clown. And no, I am not speaking in hyperbolic terms here. SCP-1127-1 is a 23-minute film entitled Were Clowns Always Yellow? And was first discovered illegally spliced into the film of a non-anomalous movie being shown at a New York City Cineplex. As I alluded to not long ago, the narrator of this film is a man in a period-accurate World War II SS uniform, save for one detail. He has a clownish face painted on in grease paint. The recycled footage, in addition to archival footage of World War II, comes largely from movies that deal with the events and fallout of the tragic war and the many atrocities committed within, including The Night Porter, the unreleased Jerry Lewis movie The Day the Clown Cried, and even The Sound of Music. The Nazi clown goes on a rant about the nature of humor before pulling out his holstered Luger pistol and shooting Jerry Lewis in the head. You may think that audiences would find this material disturbing, but on the contrary, people who have watched this film frequently describe it as the funniest movie they've ever seen. And for those who experience the film's anomalous effects, the strangeness does not end there. SCP-1127-1 essentially reverses the polarity of the subject's humor and disgust. For the rest of their life, they will find things typically considered depressing, morbid, or disgusting to be hilarious. Whereas they will find things intended to be comedy, no matter how innocuous, to be disgusting and disturbing. Wars, tragedies, cruelty, and funerals suddenly become hilarious, but when Foundation researchers tested the film on a group of D-Class personnel, they started having extreme reactions of physical revulsion towards comedy. One member of D-Class personnel had to be physically restrained while being shown an episode of Monty Python's Flying Circus. However, other than some strange reactions in public and very peculiar media tastes, this film won't make you unable to enter society after some quick amnestic treatment from the Foundation. The same, sadly, cannot be said for the next one. SCP-1127-2 is a 37-minute-long movie entitled Crazy Where You Are, and was first discovered posted online, where it managed to get views in the quadruple digits before the Foundation was able to find it and shut it down. Nobody truly knows what kind of horrific damage it could have caused in that time, considering its extremely dangerous anomalous effects. The film featured a 12-year-old girl as its narrator, methodically performing surgery on her teddy bear while wearing a blue dress and a black domino mask, like the ones commonly worn by classic heroes like the masked swordsman Zorro and Batman's sidekick Robin. But the content and result of Crazy Where You Are anything but heroic. The girl eerily whispers things like, "What are you afraid of? Violence. Afraid that violence is the answer. Or is it the question? Ask the question you are afraid of. You already know the answer. Pain doesn't hurt." While a montage of children's media mixed with incredibly violent media plays below, including everything from the infamous shock film Faces of Death to old Bugs Bunny cartoons from the 1940s that really haven't aged well. You might think that experiencing this bizarre little film would greatly disturb its viewers, but those who watch long enough to experience its anomalous effects will report no strong reaction to the film at all. They will appear stony-faced and disconnected. They'll then carry this feeling of general apathy away from the film and back into their everyday life. These unfortunate moviegoers will slowly lose their sense of empathy and begin to experience a complete severing of their emotional investment in the world around them. Even hostile and dangerous situations will register with the same sense of disinterest that one might feel towards a slice of overcooked toast. This would undeniably mean that the victims might become indifferent to their own safety, but it doesn't stop there. Viewers of this film are likely to develop sociopathic tendencies, including the desire to hurt others out of a sense of detached intellectual curiosity. We have no way of knowing how many serial killers started their monstrous journey by viewing this nasty little short film and becoming inspired. Because of this volatile and dangerous change, the Foundation believes that those affected are unable to safely reintegrate into society and must remain in containment. Next comes a film that is less frightening and more deeply tragic. This is SCP-1127-3, a 30-minute short film entitled All Comes With Yesterday. This devious little piece of cinema found its way in front of unwitting eyes via a pirate UHF signal in a coastal Michigan town, which exposed innocent viewers of public television to 72 hours of the cursed film on loop. No physical copy of this film has ever been obtained by the SCP Foundation, and from the original recorded broadcast alone, the Foundation is aware that people in the double digits were affected by its dangerous, anomalous properties. The narrator of this film is a woman who appears to be in her mid-30s, wearing an Elizabethan ball gown and a golden theatrical mask in the form of a rat's face, which appears to be permanently affixed to her own. Rather than speaking in complete sentences, this narrator's speech is eerily fragmented, with one recorded segment being her whispering, desire, aspire, require, conspire, acquire, retire, expire, choir, pyre, liar, 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 liar. After which, she continued to simply repeat the word liar over several minutes, while mashed up footage of several classic movies plays, including RoboCop, the biblical epic The Ten Commandments, Francis Ford Coppola's Apocalypse Now, Natural Born Killers, Eraserhead, and George Romero's original Dawn of the Dead. With a setup that strange and eclectic, you're probably wondering what the end result of viewing this strange little offering is. To put it simply, it induces a state of debilitating technophobia. You become a perpetually anxious Luddite, terrified of anything considered even vaguely technological. And we mean this in the broadest sense of the word. anything deemed to be manufactured by mechanical means, from furniture to clothes, becomes terrifying to the unfortunate viewers of All Comes with Yesterday. Because of the life-altering extent of the phobia induced, people affected by this film are unable to integrate back into normal society, and instead need to be given Class A amnestics before being permanently institutionalized. And finally, the film that, for your psychological health, will leave mostly to the imagination, SCP-1127-4, a 42-minute film with the ominous title, Why Are You Crying? Over 300 DVD copies of this film were slipped between the pages of body romance novels in a number of Canadian bookstores, claiming to be a special feature that comes with the book. And those who were morbidly curious enough to watch it had their lives forever changed for the worse. The narrator of this film is a man whose face is obscured by a menacing leather mask. He gives a free-form soliloquy about the nature of love and attraction over footage of various shocking or abstract underground films and cult classics, like Premaster 3, The Rocky Horror Picture Show, and the late Italian filmmaker Pier Pasolini's infamous final film before his sudden murder, 1975's Salo. Anyone who watches this film for long enough is likely to develop some very original ideas about the nature of attraction. Ideas that most of us might consider somewhat strange or disturbing. I think we'll leave it at that. But suffice to say, many of the people affected by Why Are You Crying? Are unable to return to society after their viewing and need to remain in containment. Any instances of these cursed films found outside of containment are under the purview of Mobile Task Force Mu-53, also known as Ebert's Thumb, named after the iconic film critic Roger Ebert. Physical copies are to be seized and held in storage, and digital copies are to be contained and heavily encrypted before being neutralized for safety purposes. SCP-1127 instances are to be kept in the secure media vault of a classified site, and only brought out for testing when personally approved by the acting site director. Only D-Class personnel are permitted to view the films for their full duration. Foundation personnel who, during testing, are exposed to a cumulative 15 minutes of any of the films are to be reassigned to a different project for safety purposes. People who have viewed the films are to undergo a full psychological evaluation by Foundation psychologists and psychiatrists to determine the extent of the effects on them and decide what additional treatment, if any, they require. Thankfully, because of the inert nature of this anomaly, it is still classified as safe, but anyone lurking out there with copies of the films could cause horrific damage at any time by exposing unwitting people to the films. So if any shady individuals invite you to a private film festival in their basement, it's probably best to just decline. These films aren't going to be hitting the Criterion Collection anytime soon. Cinema can be a transformative experience. Everyone's seen that one movie that saves their life and changes everything. Just make sure, if you're planning on burning through a few short films this weekend, you know how exactly you want to be transformed.
The ground rumbled. Not like thunder. No, this was more like something was angry. The young man's feet slapped against the earth, his breath coming in short, ragged bursts. Behind him was something enormous, something that shouldn't exist, but it did, and it was closing in. He didn't know exactly what it was, but it was hungry, and that was enough for him. He had heard the stories, bigger than a mountain, faster than a lightning bolt, teeth like jagged rocks. He was running for his life. The trees blurred as he dashed through them, the predator's growls vibrating in his bones. No time to think, just run. Then he saw it up ahead, the cave, the dark, inviting mouth of the cave. The young man didn't hesitate. He dove inside, nearly tripping over his own feet, hands scraping against the cold rock as he shoved his body deeper into the darkness. Then, silence. For all of 2 seconds. Thud, thud, thud. The growls outside the cave grew louder. It was still there. The creature had followed him in. There was no escape. He pressed himself against the cold stone, trying to slow his breathing, praying for the predator to... what? Get tired? Forget about him? Then, there were voices.
Go, go!
Someone hissed.
Push the rock!
The young man's eyes widened. Oh no. It was the tribe. They had been following him, apparently. They weren't just watching from a distance. They were playing their part, and it looked like they were really into it. A woman, the leader of the group, appeared from behind a bush, arms flailing dramatically.
Seal it! Seal it!
She shouted, looking way too enthusiastic for someone trying to trap a massive beast. A man next to her tried pushing a rock twice his size. It barely budged.
Get off me!
He growled, trying to wrangle it with all the grace of a half-drunk bear.
I swear this thing was lighter in the last rehearsal.
One by one, the tribe emerged, looking like a confused parade of squirrels who'd just remembered they were supposed to be doing something important. They scurried out of the bushes, arms full of rocks that were nowhere near as big as they needed to be. The entire scene felt like a bad play. One guy rolled a rock that was comically small and got stuck under it. Another two bickered over a particularly large one, trying to shove it up a hill like it was a toddler at a water park.
More rocks,
Yelled a third, as if they were building a house, not sealing a death trap. Through all this chaos, the young man barely had the energy to protest. He'd been running for his life, only to end up helping these people. If this wasn't the weirdest moment of his life, he didn't know what was. Finally, after some truly embarrassing grunting, pushing, and a very inappropriate dance involving a boulder, the entrance was sealed. There it was, the cave entrance, blocked by rocks that could have been knocked over by a strong gust of wind.
Done!
One of them shouted, hands on his hips like he'd just won a race. The tribe paused, looking at their work. They had somehow sealed in the beast with rocks that could barely stop a rabbit, let alone a monster that could probably crush a tree with its tail.
Well,
The leader said, nodding.
that should do it. Safe, for now.
The young man, now thoroughly bewildered, slumped against the cave wall.
For now?
He croaked, and that's when they started to celebrate. They sang a little song, something that sounded like a goose being stepped on while being dragged through the mud. It wasn't a pleasant melody, but it was full of enthusiasm. A young woman grabbed a bunch of random flowers, tossing them onto the ground like she was handing out raffle prizes at a carnival.
Thank you for your sacrifice,
she called, as if he had volunteered for this. Another person, clearly too happy for someone who was supposed to be helping seal a cave of doom, started doing a strange little jig. Their feet shuffled side to side in a way that could only be described as prehistoric dad dance moves. The young man stared at the ceiling, trying to make sense of the bizarre series of events. His legs ached, his chest burned, and his fate? Well, it was sealed, all right. The predator was trapped, and the tribe? Well, they thought they were safe. Little did they know, the real beast was still inside, waiting, hungry, watching. But for now, the tribe was oblivious. They were too busy dancing, singing, and congratulating themselves for their successful trap. And somewhere in the dark, the young man let out a long, tired sigh. Was this really what passed for a victory? Yes. Yes, it was. Thousands of years later, the cave had become a part of something much larger, a palace no less. The mouth of the cave had been hidden, buried beneath the mighty palace of King Minos of Crete. If anyone knew the truth about what mythical thing laid below, no one bothered to say anything. But the labyrinth was real. The endless maze beneath the palace, its twisting paths carved into the stone, had a reputation, and it wasn't just the locals who feared it. Every 9 years, the people of Athens were required to send a grim tribute, a procession of 7 sons and 7 daughters, sacrificed to the beast that lived in the maze. The Minotaur, as the prehistoric creature had come to be called, was a terror that even King Minos himself could not control. He didn't have to. The tribute kept the beast fed, the people of Athens in line, and the king's power unquestioned. But one year, a wrinkle in the plan appeared. Theseus, son of King Aegeus of Athens, volunteered. He wasn't going to be just another tribute. No, he had something else in mind. He'd heard the stories. The Minotaur had been contained once, long ago, and Theseus believed that this time he could finish it off, kill the beast, become a hero, and while the Greek gods watched, he would save Athens from the cruel demands of this Cretan king. When Theseus and the other tributes arrived on the island of Crete, they were met by a spectacle of grandeur and gold. The palace of King Minos stood tall, a monument to human ambition, while the labyrinth, dark and secretive, loomed beneath it. But Theseus wasn't concerned with the palace or the labyrinth's exterior. His mind was elsewhere, on Ariadne, the beautiful daughter of Minos. He saw her from the moment they landed, her eyes catching the sunlight, the perfect distraction. He knew what he had to do.
You should help me.
He whispered to her one evening at a dinner banquet.
I can kill the beast, but I can't do it alone.
Ariadne raised an eyebrow, the slightest hint of curiosity in her eyes. Why should I help you? She asked, arms crossed, as if she already knew what was coming. Well, Theseus grinned, because if you don't, then I'll be stuck there forever. You don't want that, do you? She scoffed, but the spark of interest was clear. And why do you think you can kill the Minotaur? Theseus flashed her a grin. I'm born to be a hero." She stared at him for a long moment, measuring him, and then shrugged. "All right, but if I help you, you have to come back and marry me, because my father will be really mad," she said as she pulled a small ball of thread from her belt. "Oh, I will," Theseus said confidently. Too confidently. He took the thread from her, understanding the plan. She would help him navigate the maze, but more than that, she would keep him alive. And so, with her help, Theseus ventured into the labyrinth. But let's get one thing straight. Theseus didn't kill the Minotaur. Oh no. According to the myth, that's how the story goes. Theseus is hailed as a hero who killed the beast and returned victorious, having overcome impossible odds. But that's not what really happened. What actually happened was a bit messier. The maze, like the tribe's dance, had its own rhythm, and as Theseus maneuvered through the twisting corridors, chasing the echo of his own footsteps, he realized the beast wasn't exactly what they said it was. Sure, it was terrifying, huge, and, yes, covered in muscle and fury, but it wasn't invincible. It wasn't unbeatable. It was, however, trappable. In the heart of the maze, the Minotaur lunged at him, teeth snapping, claws slashing through the air, and Theseus did the only thing he could think of. He ran. Fast. Using the thread Ariadne gave him, he darted through the maze, winding his way back and forth, weaving the string behind him like a breadcrumb trail. He could hear the beast following, but the closer he got to the exit, the less he cared about whether or not the Minotaur was still behind him. He'd made it. He was out. Ariadne waited at the entrance, and as soon as Theseus stepped into the light, he threw his arms up in triumph. "I did it!" he shouted. "I killed the Minotaur!" Ariadne looked at him, confused. "You... what?" "I killed it," Theseus said again, more forcefully this time. He was sure he had. In the distance, there was a growl, low, rumbling. The beast was still alive, still waiting. Ariadne didn't say anything. She just stared at him for a long time. But Theseus had already started to walk away, claiming his mythical hero's victory. Ariadne watched him go, the ball of thread dangling loosely in her hands. She had helped him, yes, but she knew the truth. There had never been a hero here. A few more 1,000 years later, Crete, its ancient ruins now barely recognizable, had been pummeled by the fury of Nazi planes. But where buildings fell, something else rose. Discovery. Beneath the wreckage of the ancient Minoan palace, something had been waiting. It had been waiting for a long time. A group of Nazi soldiers scoured the rubble of the once great palace searching for loot. They weren't interested in ruins or history. No, they had been sent to collect anything that could be sold. Ancient Greek treasures? Perfect. Roman artifacts? Even better. But when one soldier knocked over a pile of broken stone, something caught his eye. It was an oddly shaped stone slab, embedded into the earth, covered in debris. It was like it had been forgotten, or perhaps hidden. "Hey, look at this!" he shouted, pulling at the stone with an eager grunt. The others rushed over. They had all been waiting for a lucky find like this. One of them, a bit too eager, grabbed a pickaxe and started hacking at the slab. After a few strikes, it cracked. The soldiers looked at each other. This wasn't just a tomb. No, this was a big one, the kind of tomb you don't find every day. The door was massive, thick stone and etched with strange carvings. "Should we open it?" one soldier asked, his voice sounding more like a question than a command. "Why not? We've come this far," the Nazi officer in charge muttered, grinning. The entrance creaked open, revealing what appeared to be nothing but darkness. The soldiers stared at each other, unsure of what to make of it. One by one, they shuffled inside, expecting gold, maybe jewels, but definitely not whatever waited in the shadows. Inside, the space seemed far too big for the entrance, stretching endlessly, like the stone tomb was a portal to a place far beyond their expectations. The walls closed in around them. It was alive with a strange, anomalous energy, but they kept going. What else was there to do? They'd come this far. "Find the treasure," the officer snapped, "and make it quick." As they pushed forward, their flashlights flickered. Their hearts raced. It was only moments before one of them at the front screamed. A horrific, guttural roar echoed from somewhere deep in the maze. His body was gone, swallowed by the darkness. The rest of the soldiers froze, the air thick with fear. But the officer wasn't about to give up that easily. "We're not leaving without something. Move out!" he shouted, his eyes hardening. "Whatever it is, we have guns." One by one, the soldiers continued to venture into the labyrinth, their breaths heavy, their steps unsure. They didn't know it yet, but they had just stepped into something that didn't follow the laws of nature. Only one man made it back to the entrance alive. He staggered out, his face pale, eyes wide with terror. In his hand, he clutched ancient gold jewelry, but there was no pride in his grip, only raw fear. The others were nowhere to be seen.
What happened?
One soldier asked, his voice barely a whisper.
There's something in there.
The man said, voice trembling.
A beast. It's not like anything we've seen. It's still in there, waiting. Don't.
His voice cracked.
Don't go back in.
The officer looked at him like he had just heard a joke.
You're telling me there's a beast?
He laughed, more to himself than anyone else.
I don't know what you saw, but there's treasure in there. And we're getting it.
The survivor shook his head. The Nazi soldier's smile faded. He pulled out his pistol, aiming it at the soldier.
You're going back in,
he said, his voice low and dangerous. The soldier froze, his body trembling.
I won't. You can't make me.
Without hesitation, the officer pulled the trigger. The body slumped to the ground, lifeless.
All right then,
the officer muttered, slipping the gun back into its holster. Clearly he was the one in charge now. He turned to the others.
Back up the tomb. We're taking this to England. There's a buyer. They've been paying top dollar for looted artifacts from Greece. And this thing,
he gestured to the dark entrance.
It's going to make us rich. They'll want it. We'll sell it. We'll be kings.
And just like that, the tomb, the maze, and the beast that lay in waiting was packed up and shipped off to England just like any other treasure. When the spoils of war arrived in England, they weren't just in crates marked fragile. No, they were delivered to the extravagant manor of a particularly wealthy English lord, a man who had spent his life collecting, no, curating, the finest treasures history had to offer. And now, with the war over, the spoils of conquest were his for the taking. Among his new acquisitions were priceless Parthenon sculptures, finely detailed pottery, and of course, the crown jewel, the tomb from the Minoan Palace in Crete. The tomb wasn't much to look at on the outside, just a plain stone box, really. But when the Lord opened it and peered inside, his eyes widened in disbelief. The space inside was vast. The whole thing was far bigger than it had any right to be. It didn't fit. It was like opening a cupboard and finding a whole new world inside. Naturally, the Lord wasn't about to dive into this mystery without a bit of flair. This, he decided, required a proper crew. So he hired the best and brightest, electricians, builders, plumbers, no more of this amateur nonsense. He was a man of taste. He had grand plans for the tomb.
Let's make this a proper exploration,
he declared, gesturing toward the labyrinth inside.
We'll run electrical lines through it. Light bulbs on the ceiling, a nice little chandelier in there for flair. It'll be a living space, you see. Very modern.
Naturally, he left the entrance door wide open. Who would dare steal from him? His home was practically a museum. He could trust the help. And so, the crew got to work. They strung wires through the corridors, placed light bulbs on the ceiling like they were installing lamps in a drawing room. They even found a curious little trickle of water running through the walls.
Ah,
the foreman said, rubbing his hands together with glee.
Nice bit of plumbing could make this even more impressive. Let's get some pipes in here, lads.
This way, the water wouldn't mess with the electrical equipment. He had the situation under control, or so he thought. As the crew began fitting the walls with pipes, the atmosphere grew thicker. The deeper they worked, the colder it seemed to get, but no one complained. After all, this was England, and it was winter. Everything was a bit chilly. That was when they heard it. A low rumble deep in the bowels of the tomb. Something growling. At first, they shrugged it off. Maybe it was the pipes shifting, the walls settling. But no, it grew louder. The foreman raised his head.
What in God's name was that?
His voice barely a whisper. The noise that erupted was enough to make the foreman drop his clipboard and run. The crew scrambled to pack up, but it was too late. The beast appeared, with claws and teeth, and a hunger no human could satisfy. Most of the crew didn't even make it to the door. By the time the last man bolted, the beast had already claimed its prize. One by one, the workers were picked off, their screams muffled by the thick stone walls. Only one man, a young carpenter, managed to escape. He ran, legs pumping, his heart a terrified rhythm in his chest. As he reached the entrance, he threw himself against the door, sealing it with all his might. The Lord, who had been sipping a brandy in the garden nearby, sauntered over, casually adjusting his waistcoat.
Well, what's the delay?
The carpenter, pale as a ghost, looked up at him with wild eyes.
There's a beast in there.
The carpenter gasped. The Lord raised an eyebrow, unfazed.
A beast, you say?
He asked, his tone laced with mockery.
Nonsense, it's just some animal. A wild boar. It's an old tomb, nothing more. A little superstition to keep us all on edge.
He didn't even blink before pulling a cigar from his coat pocket.
You,
he said to the carpenter,
will go back in there. I'm not paying good money for a superstition. You'll go in there and find the treasure. That's the job.
The carpenter tried to argue, but the Lord's gaze was cold. It was an order. The carpenter knew he didn't have a choice. With trembling hands, the carpenter unsealed the tomb, and the moment he opened it, the maze had changed again. The paths were different. The walls had moved, twisting like something alive. The carpenter froze.
No,
he whispered, stepping back.
I won't go in there again. It's not the same, it's...
Before he could finish, a gunshot rang out, cutting him off.
Pathetic,
the Lord muttered, watching the carpenter fall. He wasn't even angry, just annoyed, as if a servant had broken a vase. The next day, a fresh team of workers reluctantly unsealed the tomb again. The Lord, as usual, was lounging nearby, sipping his brandy, looking far too pleased with himself for someone so oblivious. He could already taste the gold, the treasure, the profit. The foreman opened the door. The new crew stepped in, their boots crunching on the gravel floor. They had a little more confidence, having heard the fun story from the carpenter, but they also didn't quite know what to expect. And when they looked inside, they were dumbfounded.
Blimey,
one of them muttered. The maze had completely changed. The walls that had been one way the day before were now another. The path the previous crew had carefully mapped out was gone. No light fixtures, no pipes. Everything they'd worked on, gone, vanished, like a dream that slipped away as soon as you woke up. The foreman scratched his head.
All right, lads, let's get to work.
And work they did. They put in new electrical wires, strung up more lighting fixtures, and even found that same curious trickle of water in the walls. But as soon as they began installing new pipes to siphon off the water, they heard it. That same deep, low, guttural growl. The workers were attacked. A few managed to survive and refused to enter the tomb again. And so it continued. The door to the tomb was opened again the next morning, and the morning after that, and every single time the maze had changed. Walls shifted, paths disappeared, new turns appeared where there had been none. It was as if the tomb, the maze, was alive, changing, adapting, moving. Every time the workers managed to run some basic electrical lines and fit a few light bulbs, they would get close to digging into the walls to put in the pipes, and then the beast would strike. Every single time. It never stopped. One or two survivors would crawl out, their faces ashen, their bodies cut up, half crazed, babbling the same story. And each time, the Lord, gritting his teeth, would order the workers back in. And each time, the same thing would happen. The beast, the maze, the shifting walls. Finally, after years of this, the Lord grew old and tired. Tired of the maze, the beast, and the stupid treasure hunt.
Enough is enough,
the Lord said to himself one evening, sitting by the fire, nursing a glass of brandy.
I've spent enough time and money.
The rest of the treasures, the statues, the pottery, the pieces of the Parthenon of the ancient Greek Acropolis, well, those would all go to a museum, of course. They would make a proper display of it. But the tomb, that cursed tomb, that wouldn't go to the museum. The Lord had grown too fond of the idea of getting rid of it to really hand it over. So he had the tomb packed into a metal crate and sent off to one of the poorest parts of London, a slum littered with the unhoused, the forgotten. Within days, the first disappearances were reported. At first, no one thought much of it. People went missing all the time in the slums. No one bothered to ask why. But then the numbers grew. The story started to spread. Entire groups of unhoused people vanishing overnight. And what was worse, no trace was left behind. No signs of struggle. No blood. They were just gone. Eventually, the Foundation was pinged and immediately retrieved this anomaly for further research. This supposed tomb is actually a real anomaly and has been classified by the Foundation as SCP-432. It's a steel storage cabinet, 2 meters tall, 1.2 meters wide, and 1 meter deep. From the outside, it looks like an ordinary, albeit worn, piece of storage furniture, with its matte green exterior covered in corrosion and scratches from years of exposure. The doors are simple, fitted with a slide bolt and a padlock for security. But when one opens the doors, they're not greeted by shelves or a storage space. Instead, they're faced with an extra-dimensional labyrinth. The space inside seems to defy the normal laws of physics, as it's far larger than the cabinet's external dimensions suggest. Inside is a maze of corridors made of heavily rusted steel. The corridors are lit by flickering household light bulbs, many of which are broken. Some walls are lined with steel pipes carrying cold water, though the source and destination of this water are completely unknown. It's drinkable, but it contains low oxygen and traces of iron oxide. The maze itself is impossible to map accurately. Every time the cabinet is closed and reopened, the entrance shifts to a completely different part of the labyrinth. No one can predict how the layout will change. As for those who venture inside, there have been no confirmed survivors, only remains. Some suggest starvation is the cause, but there's also evidence pointing to something far more dangerous, SCP-432-1, a large predatory entity that inhabits the maze. Its exact species is still unidentified, but it has been responsible for the deaths of multiple personnel. Now there's more to this anomaly than just the danger it presents. Technology, GPS units, phones, remote devices, fails after traveling about 20 meters into the maze. The only form of communication that still works are high-gain radio transmissions, though even those become heavily interfered with the deeper you go. Several expeditions have been sent into SCP-432 with D-Class personnel in an attempt to map the interior, but progress has been slow and dangerous. No further expeditions can be authorized without approval from at least 2 Level 4 personnel. What we do know is that the cabinet was constructed in the early 1950s, but the artifacts recovered from the maze have been traced back to much earlier periods. This suggests the maze, and perhaps the cabinet itself, may be linked to something far older, something not yet fully understood. As for containment, SCP-432 remains locked at all times. The key is secured in a nearby security station and is guarded by 3 Level 3 personnel. There are no additional special containment procedures needed, but we must be vigilant. There's much more we don't know about this anomaly, and it's essential we continue studying it while keeping it contained. It started the moment she was born. No screams, no wails, just a single breath, a faint pulse, and then nothing. Her skin was too smooth, too perfect, like a doll's face. No creases, no expression, no eyes, no mouth, no ears, just a blank canvas. The doctor looked at her, then at the nurse. Neither of them said a word. They just stood there, silent. It was the kind of silence that fills the room when everyone knows something's wrong, but nobody wants to be the one to say it. The doctor cleared his throat.
It's not right,
he murmured. His voice shook just a little. He wasn't supposed to feel anything, not in his line of work, but there he was, staring at a child born with no face, his professionalism cracking like a cheap vase. The nurse, already crossing herself, looked away.
"You think it's some kind of defect?"
she whispered, her voice barely above a breath, as if speaking too loudly might make the child reel.
Defect?
The doctor's voice cracked. He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous habit.
I don't know what it is, but I know it's not right.
The nurse shuddered.
"Is it alive?"
Her voice was full of dread. He hesitated. Couldn't finish the thought. He couldn't answer her. Was it alive? Fast forward several years, and she was still the same, silent, expressionless, and stuck in time like an exhibit in some sick museum. In the cold, dim halls of an orphanage, she drifted through the days like a ghost, watching, but never participating.
"She doesn't even look human,"
one of the kids muttered one day, watching her from across the room. The child never reacted. She couldn't. Her eyes, if she had any, were empty, her mouth non-existent. She was an enigma, and that terrified them.
"I think she is human, but she's like, not,"
another whispered. He pulled his sleeves over his hands, like he was afraid her presence might touch him.
"Don't look at her, she can feel it,"
one of the older girls warned.
"If she looks at you and you look back, I don't know what happens, but it's bad. Don't mess with her."
But none of the kids could stay away. They were too curious, too scared, and so they watched from a distance. And she didn't speak, didn't react, didn't do anything at all, really, except for one thing: survive, and not in the way anyone expected. Her skin, smooth and pliable, had strange, unnatural holes carved into it. No, her skin wasn't sick, it wasn't torn. These holes were deliberate. Someone had made them. They had a purpose. These were for food. They fed her like she was a machine. One of the caretakers, an older man with a wrinkled face and sunken eyes, eyed her curiously as the girl sat in her corner, unmoving.
You ever wonder why she doesn't need a mouth?
He asked the younger caretaker, who had just brought in a bowl of mush. The younger man shrugged, shaking his head.
She's just different.
The older man leaned closer, his gaze intense.
Yeah, well, that skin? Think it'll crack open and talk one day?
He looked back over at the girl.
I don't think it even can,
the younger caretaker muttered, almost in awe. And the girl didn't care. She didn't need to care. She was an observer, a passive participant in her own existence, floating in that weird space between life and nothingness. Not fully there, not fully gone. Everything stayed the same cold room, the same tasteless mush in a bowl pushed through the holes in her stomach for nourishment, the same curious, terrified stares from the other children. One day, like any other, the children sat in the worn-down dining hall. The little girl was in her usual corner, as always, untouched by the world. The constant hum of chatter and clatter barely registered with her. It was just noise. But there was always that tall, thin man, the caretaker who didn't say much. He watched her, day after day, with that quiet intensity that sent shivers down her spine. The others ignored him. They'd long since given up on asking what he was doing. One day, he muttered to himself, barely audible,
"You'd think she'd blink."
The younger caretaker glanced up. What? The thin man didn't even look away from the girl.
"She's never blinked,"
he said slowly, his words a mix of fascination and disbelief.
"Not once. Not since the day she got here."
The younger man stared at the girl for a moment.
She doesn't have eyes.
The thin man leaned in closer and whispered,
"She doesn't move when she's supposed to."
The younger man shrugged.
Maybe she's just really good at being still.
He wasn't paying attention anymore, but the thin man was. His notepad was already out, the pages filled with small, careful scribbles, observations, notes. He tracked her every movement, no matter how small, no matter how unsettling. He wasn't watching her like the others. He wasn't frightened. He was intrigued, obsessed. The little girl felt it, the weight of his eyes. She didn't know why, but she always felt it, like a pull, a gaze that dug into her skin. It wasn't like anyone else's. She couldn't see him, but she knew he was watching. And it wasn't in the casual way the other children watched her from across the room. No, he was watching her intently, like she was the only thing in the world worth looking at. He never spoke to her, never asked questions. He just observed. "Why do you stare at me?" she wanted to ask, but she never did. How could she? She didn't have a mouth to speak from. Was he waiting for something? Or was he just watching to see how far she would go before her skin tore her apart? Her 14th birthday came with a dull thud. No fanfare, no cake, no one even remembered. The orphanage didn't care, why would they? But she did. Something in her was changing, and she felt it. She didn't know what yet, but it was there, creeping through her body like a slow poison. The skin on her forearm began to shift, to ripple, like it wasn't quite attached anymore. A tiny, strange movement, too small for anyone else to notice, but she did. It started with a subtle shift, a tightness in her skin, like something invisible was trying to hold her still, trying to contain her, trying to stop her from breaking out. But her body, it was getting restless. Her epidermis, her skin, that strange smooth layer, began to stretch, pull, tighten, like a snug garment that no longer fits. It rippled, it twitched, desperate, like it was trying to get out, escape. She wanted to scream, but surprise, no mouth, no voice. And the caretaker? He noticed too. His eyes went wide, like he'd seen something precious. A grin slowly spread across his face as he scribbled frantically in his notebook, tapping his pen like he had a direct line to some unholy discovery.
"Autonomic movement, epidermal reaction, possibly independent action of the dermis,"
he muttered under his breath, a little too excited for someone who's been around kids like this for years. The children noticed it too. Well, some of them did. The others, too used to ignoring the strange girl, now turned their heads toward her. Eyes narrowed. Whispers slid through the room like poison.
"Look, she's doing something."
One of them gasped.
"She's moving. She's not dead."
Her skin was moving as if it had a mind of its own. And that's when he stepped forward, the caretaker, the one who'd been watching her, obsessing over her every movement. His face, typically unreadable, now twisted with what could only be described as clinical excitement.
You're hungry,
he said as if he were speaking to a child who'd been misbehaving. His voice was soft, almost too soft.
I'll fix that.
Without waiting for a reaction, he grabbed the long feeding tubes from the table. His hands were trembling, but it wasn't from fear. It was from something else, something darker, something too excited. The tubes were long, cold, and sterile, and he shoved one through the holes in her skin before she could even react. The feeding system was supposed to work. It had always worked before, but not now. She felt the tube slide into her, pushing deep into her stomach. His hands moved quickly, forcefully. He didn't give her a chance to resist.
You need this,
he muttered to himself, tapping the pump, watching as the mush of food began to flow. But the holes in her skin didn't line up with her stomach anymore. It was like trying to shove a square peg into a round hole. The food stuck. Her skin, once docile, pressed and squeezed, not letting anything pass. It rejected it. She could feel the food getting stuck, pressing against her insides. The pressure built, sharper and sharper, like her entire body was being stretched, suffocated by something that didn't belong.
Come on,
he urged, as though coaxing a stubborn child to take a bite.
You'll feel better, just let it in.
But the food wasn't going anywhere. Her skin fought back, squeezing tighter, pushing the food back through the tubes. And when he tried to pump more, the pressure became too much. Her stomach, her entire body, spasmed in resistance, the food sloshing painfully inside her as her body rejected it violently. The pain hit like a truck. It was so intense, so deep, that she couldn't think. It was maddening. She couldn't scream, not without a mouth, but if she could have, the sound would have echoed off the walls like a banshee's wail. She couldn't cry. If she had eyes, maybe tears would have fallen, but instead, the frustration rippled across her cheeks like phantom rivers. Her body twisted, bended, and each movement felt wrong, like her own body had betrayed her. Meanwhile, the room at the orphanage buzzed with the usual noise, scraping against metal bowls, feet shuffling across the worn floorboards, and the murmur of voices too bored to care. A boy in the corner watched her, a scrawny thing no older than 12. It wasn't the first time he'd noticed her oddities. He'd made faces behind her back, mimicked her jerky movements when he thought no one was looking. He had taunted her before, whispered insults, pulled faces, and laughed at her. Today was no different. The boy, shifting from foot to foot, narrowed his eyes. He was clearly intrigued by the way she struggled.
Don't you ever get tired of being broken?
He sneered, loud enough to be heard over the general din.
You've been like this forever, haven't you?
The little girl didn't even flinch. She didn't even acknowledge him. Her face remained turned away, her body jerking in strange, disjointed movements, like it was at war with itself.
Go ahead,
the boy continued, voice turning nastier.
Try to eat. Let's see how long it takes before you choke on your own skin, freak.
Something inside her snapped. She couldn't explain it. It wasn't planned, it wasn't rational, it was just there. A reflex, a violent surge. Before she could even think, her hand shot out, faster than she could control. She didn't feel it, not at first, but then the boy was no longer standing. He crumpled to the floor. She stood above him, trembling, her hands shaking. Her skin was alive beneath her, twitching, shifting, as though it couldn't believe what it had just done. The boy's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He gasped, struggling for breath, his fingers clawing at his throat. His eyes were wide, confused, panicked. Her skin rippled again, as if it was taking it all in. It was too much for her to understand. She took a slow step back, her body moving in a jerky, uncoordinated motion, like she wasn't in control anymore, like she never had been. Minutes passed, but it felt like hours. The air was thick with the kind of silence that only happens when something awful is about to go down. Finally, someone screamed, a high-pitched, gut-wrenching sound that broke the stillness like glass shattering. One of the caretakers finally rushed forward and grabbed the little girl's arm roughly. She didn't resist. She couldn't. She barely even felt the pull of the hands that jerked her away from the boy's body. Her body, stiff as a board, moved only because the world forced it to.
Come on,
one of the guards barked, his voice strained, his grip far too tight. She was dragged across the floor, the skin on her body twitching, squirming, like it was trying to escape the guard's hands. But she didn't fight. Her limbs were stiff, like her joints had forgotten how to bend properly. She felt like she was floating in her own body, trapped in a cage of her own making. The other children, pale with terror, watched her from their seats. Some turned away, some gasped. A few whispered, their voices barely audible.
Did she kill him?
One of them murmured, eyes wide with fear.
How could she do that?
The little girl's eyes, if you could even call them eyes, stared blankly at the floor as the guards marched her down the hallway. Their boots echoed off the empty walls like a drumbeat of doom. It was just her and the guards now, her stiff form, her skin still twitching in strange patterns. She didn't care about the whispers, about the looks. There was no room in her mind for them. Her world was nothing but the hard, unyielding pull of the guards' hands, dragging her further away from the only thing that still made sense, the boy, crumpled and still on the floor. She wasn't given a defense. There was no attempt to understand her. The court didn't even care. They saw only what they wanted to see. No voice, no explanation, just a blank canvas, a blank thing to fill with their own assumptions.
Should have figured it out sooner.
One of the jurors muttered, his voice heavy with distaste.
Look at her. Empty.
A voice from the back, thin and trembling, asked,
What is she?
The judge didn't answer. He didn't need to. In the courtroom, she was a thing, a monster. Fear had already filled in all the gaps, like a kid filling a puzzle without the picture on the box. And fear was all they needed to sentence her. Guilt? No, they didn't need to prove it. She had already been convicted the moment they'd seen her, watched her move. And so the decision was simple. The little girl, silent, unmoving, was convicted on the spot. The sentence was handed down. She would spend the rest of her life behind bars. She didn't understand the sentence, didn't feel the weight of the words. She couldn't feel anything anymore. Her skin twitched, but the rest of her was a blank slate, a void. She was dragged back to her cell, her stiff body moving mechanically. The cell itself was small, barely larger than a closet. The walls were thick and damp, made of stone that could probably absorb the screams of anyone unlucky enough to spend time in here. If she had a nose, she would have smelled the mold that clung to the cracks, but that was a luxury she wasn't born with. The guards who stood outside her cell didn't speak much. They didn't need to. They had no need to fill the silence. What they did have was their eyes, and oh, how they watched. They watched through the tiny slit in the door, their gazes fixed on her as she stood there, twitching, jerking, moving like something inhuman. They couldn't look away.
Can't stop staring, can you?
One of the janitors chuckled darkly, as if the discomfort was amusing. One of the guards snorted, but still, they couldn't stop watching, even if they wanted to. Days blurred together in the cell. Time lost all meaning. Just one long, agonizing stretch where hunger clawed at her mind and her skin continued to rebel. It stretched and pulled, tightening around her like a straitjacket that wouldn't fit. It burned. The skin stretched so much, it felt like it might tear itself apart. But it didn't. It just hardened more, digging into her like the walls of a tomb. Every moment felt like her body was becoming a prison, her prison, and there was no escape. The worst part, she couldn't move. Not anymore. Her body was frozen in place, not locked up like before, but completely stuck. It was as though time had stopped inside her skin, and her body had no say in it. Her thoughts, her mind, trapped. 11 days passed. Then the guards came. Their footsteps echoed in the hallway, slow and heavy. The sound grew louder, closer, the inevitable approach of something they'd been dreading, something they didn't know how to handle. But what they found wasn't what they expected. The guards stood frozen at the doorway for a long moment, eyes wide, breath caught in their throats. They'd seen bodies before, corpses. That wasn't new to them. But this wasn't that. It wasn't even a girl anymore. It wasn't human. Her body was hard, stone hard. The epidermis had petrified, merged with the stone walls of the cell. It was as if her skin had become one with the very room that held her captive. Her surface, cold and unyielding, gave no sign of life, no pulse, no breath. Her face, the face she had once had, was locked in an eternal grimace. Frozen in agony, she stood like someone who had suffered so much that it had carved itself into her skin, into her bones, but there was no one to hear it, no one to see it, just the image of torment, imprisoned, forever. One of the guards stepped closer, fear creeping into his voice, unsure of how to even approach this thing in front of him.
I don't think she's alive,
he muttered, half to himself, half to the others. The other guard didn't say anything. He just reached out, trembling, and touched her shoulder. His hand froze. The skin didn't move, didn't even warm under his touch. They took a step back.
She's gone.
One of the guards finally said, almost like he was talking to himself.
But she's not dead.
You see, what they didn't know, what the guards and caretakers couldn't understand, is that what happened to her skin, wasn't just some random, unexplained malfunction. It wasn't just an unlucky condition. It was SCP-6107, an anomaly that exists far beyond the simple understanding of human biology. Now, let me break it down for you because this is important. You're going to want to keep track of this. SCP-6107, colloquially known as the integumentary system, is a unique organ system. Normally, you've got your epidermis, your dermis, and your hypodermis, right? All the layers of your skin doing their thing, protecting you, keeping everything inside nice and safe. Simple, effective, we're all familiar with it. But SCP-6107, oh, it's a little different. You see, what makes SCP-6107 truly anomalous is that its skin, its epidermis, moves on its own. It has this weird autonomy. If the body experiences distress, if there's pain, trauma, even just an accumulation of tension, this skin reacts. It shifts, it pulls, it can stretch, it can tighten, it can even reject its own form. Imagine being trapped in a body that is constantly fighting against you. That's what this child experienced. But not only did it reject sustenance, it began to turn on her. And here's the kicker. The epidermis, the fourth and final layer of SCP-6107 skin, eventually hardens, petrifies, and locks the person inside. It's like her skin just decided it was done. Done with trying to keep the body alive. Done with functioning as a barrier. It becomes a prison. And once that happens, it's over. The transformation is complete. The body is stuck in that horrifying, immobile state, as if frozen in time, trapped in a permanent state of distress. That's what they saw in the cell. But the science behind it, that's what really gets interesting. This isn't a disease, not exactly. It's a biological process, one that happens when the body's own integumentary system starts to move independently. And that movement, that transformation, isn't just for show. It's a defense mechanism, a response to stress, to stimuli that the body can't handle. The body's reacting in ways it shouldn't be able to. That's why it's so unsettling. It's not just a body, it's something alive, something fighting for its survival, even if it has to destroy itself to do it. Now, the epidermis doesn't just go from normal to stone all at once. There's a gradual progression. You'll notice the early stages, what we call dermal transference, where the skin begins to move independently of the other layers. This is the first sign something's wrong. You get this odd, almost involuntary shifting of the dermis. It's not like ordinary skin reactions, like when you get goosebumps or sweat. This is different. It's the dermis deciding on its own to fight against what's happening beneath it. It's a response, not from the brain, but from the skin itself. Next up, we get into the real kicker, the hypodermis. In most humans, the hypodermis, that fat layer below your skin, is just there. It stores fat, provides insulation, and keeps everything in place. But with SCP-6107, the hypodermis doesn't stay put. It reacts. It distends. It tenses. It's almost as if it's alive, moving like a fluid, trying to fight off whatever's causing the trauma. This is very rare. Most people's hypodermis just stays still, doing its job. But not with SCP-6107. Finally, we get to the petrification stage. The epidermis hardens fast. It solidifies into something more akin to cartilage or bone, almost like your skin is turning into stone. It's an irreversible, horrifying transformation. The body, which should be alive, becomes something frozen in time, a monument to something that went too far. It's not just dead, it's imprisoned. The process doesn't kill the person right away. The body can still function, but it's slowly, inexorably losing control. The mind, the thoughts, the humanity, it's all trapped inside this frozen, unfeeling shell. It's the last, tragic act of a body that no longer knows how to be. So what does all this mean? Why is this so important? Well, it's not just a weird medical phenomenon. It's an anomaly that blurs the line between life and death, between the natural and the unnatural. The child in the cell, she wasn't just a person. She was a victim of a process far beyond her control. And now, she's part of the anomaly, trapped forever in her own transformation. You see, SCP-6107 isn't just skin. It's a warning, a reminder of what happens when our bodies, when anything, decides it's done. And when it decides that, there's no going back. The old house has been abandoned for going on 2 decades. And as with any place that's been left uninhabited for this long, rumors tend to spiral. Of course, there are the more mundane explanations for why the 2-story, 4-bedroom home on the end of a nice street lays in semi-ruin. Black mold, asbestos, rising house prices. But those weren't the stories that most people told. Everyone in the neighborhood knew what really happened. All those years ago, the family that lived there had been murdered, and their killer was never caught. The 3 young paranormal investigators, with EMF readers in their hands and GoPro cameras mounted on their hard hats, know all about this. They approach the house in the dead of night, mumbling commentary for the recordings. If the old house really is as haunted as everyone says it is, then they could be in for something really good here. Their subscribers always loved brand new paranormal content. They use a crowbar to breach the front door and head inside. It's everything you can expect from a house that had been abandoned for 17 years. Dust, cobwebs, and graffiti abound, broken bottles scattered across the floor. Someone has scrawled, "Welcome to Hell," above the door in faded Sharpie. It all plays perfectly for the cameras. Paranormal content gold. All of them turn on their flashlights, generously provided to them by one of their sponsors, of course. But in this particular situation, they have no idea just how valuable their product really is. After all, there are some frightening things that hide in the dark. The leader of the trio begins ascending the stairs, narrating into his helmet cam, giving the more popular version of the house's legend. The perfect suburban family, torn apart, literally, by a killer hiding in their home. The family had all been brutally murdered by someone in their home, but the police never found any sign of unlawful entrance or exit. There were no clues to the killer's presence whatsoever, in fact. It was as if they were a ghost, a vapor. It was almost as though whoever killed the family had always been in that house, and even after the murders were committed, they never left the place either. As he tells the story, the lead investigator starts to feel a little nervous. Even though he himself doesn't really believe in the supernatural, he just plays up reactions for the views, he still can't help but wonder, should I really be here? Am I making a terrible mistake? Is there a chance that whatever did this all those years ago could still be in the house, waiting for me? But he pushes those thoughts from his mind. This gig is too valuable for him to wimp out now. And really, what are the chances that something actually dangerous would be lurking in the house? The other 2 investigators are still looking around downstairs, sticking together, their flashlight beams slicing through the darkness. Their boss always insists on going upstairs first. He demands the glory shot, after all. That leaves the rest of them searching the downstairs living room, dining room, and kitchen, where the best they can hope for is maybe a particularly haunted-looking dishwasher. It's why the younger of the 2 is so surprised when they suddenly feel something happening to their body that they've never experienced before. In an instant, their whole body convulses with an involuntary shudder. They feel the temperature drop, and the world gets just that little bit darker. The best way they can describe the feeling is impending doom. Like any moment now, something terrible is going to happen. But almost as soon as the feeling begins, it's gone. Intensity dropping, the dread starting to dissipate, as though whoever or whatever caused this feeling literally passed right through them. Their fellow investigator asks them if they're okay. Of course, they nod and force a smile. They're fine. It's just a spooky place is all. Atmosphere like this would get to anyone. Meanwhile, the lead investigator is exactly where he wants to be, ascending a rickety stepladder up into the attic, the very same attic where, all those years ago, the police had found what was left of the family. And from everything he'd read on the subject, their remains weren't a pretty sight, even by true crime enthusiast standards. He enters the attic and shines his flashlight around, capturing all the dusty old boxes left to rot in the cold. He's engrossed in the macabre spectacle of what had once been the worst and final moments of a group of strangers' very real lives. The attic is full of spider webs and shadows. They're so ubiquitous that as the lead investigator pauses to tell his camera the next chapter of the grisly tale, he doesn't even notice one of the shadows peeling off of the wall behind him. It wafts silently towards him like a gust of midnight air. Little by little, the blob of shadow starts to take on a vaguely human shape. It leans forward in the investigator's direction, arms extended like a classic movie monster. Long, dark claws slide out of its shadowy hands. Downstairs, the other 2 investigators hear the most terrible scream. For a moment, the more fantastical thought crosses their minds. Could this be one of the tormented souls of the departed family, longing to be heard after years of silence? Then it occurs to them that they recognize the scream. It belongs to their boss. The two of them charge up the stairs, flashlights in hand, as the screaming starts to become more desperate and pained, like that of a wounded animal with its leg caught in a trap. Those terrible wails are echoing down from the open hatch leading into the attic. It's so dark up there, something must have broken his flashlight. That's when they notice something else. Red, dripping from the open hatch. For a moment, they hesitate, wondering what could be going on up there. Could they really help, or would they just be running into the danger themselves? But soon, their desire to save their boss's life overpowers their fear. They grab the ladder and start climbing, feeling the dripping blood on the worn wooden rungs. When they finally get up into the attic, it feels like the scream is coming from everywhere, bouncing off the walls in a terrible, echoing cacophony of pain. They turn in all directions, hovering their flashlight beams around the room in wide, sweeping arcs, until both fall on the source of all this terror. And when they see it, they can't help but scream too. The lead investigator's body is floating about a foot off the ground, his screams now fading into pained gurgles. Something huge and dark is lifting him up with one hand and sinking the long, dark claws of its other into his neck. The second the twin flashlight beams concentrate on the creature, it drops the lead investigator's bleeding body down onto the ground. His skin slate gray, his feeble twitching slowing to a halt as the last of his life drains from him. Two glowing red pinpricks open up in the face of the dark figure, eyes like terrible, burning coals etching themselves into their memory. Like smoke, it continues to glide backwards further, seeking refuge in the dark, a safe haven amongst the other shadows. By this point, the two surviving investigators know there's nothing they can do for their boss anymore. All that's left is to get out and survive. They have to save themselves. They turn, wasting no time running towards the exit. They don't notice it, but the second they turn the beams of their flashlights away, the shadow's terrible eyes disappear, and it starts advancing towards them again, its claws outstretched and grasping for them with awful fury. The shadow creature grabs at their heads as they make their final leap for the exit. However, all the monster can pull away are their helmets and helmet cams as they scramble down the ladder and then down the stairs, running at speeds they didn't even think possible as the shadow slithers down behind them. It doesn't give up. It wants their lives. It wants their warm human blood on its claws. They clear the threshold of the accursed house and keep running to their car. One looks over their shoulder and sees the shadow leave the house, gaining on them, both claws outstretched and ready to rend their flesh. The two climb into their car. They see the shadow coming towards their window. It's moving so quickly, only a few feet away now. It's getting closer and closer and closer. Ignition. The car starts up and the driver smashes the pedal down. They take off, quickly accelerating up to illegal speeds as the shadow continues to chase, slowly getting smaller and smaller in the rearview mirror. A distant nightmare. A terrible, dark ghost. As it finally disappears, they feel a moment of safety. But really, only a moment. Because it occurs to them then that they cannot say with any confidence that this monster won't just be waiting for them when they get home. SCP-280, also known as Eyes in the Dark, is one of the more frightening and dangerous anomalies contained by the SCP Foundation. Of course, it likely won't be causing an XK-class end-of-the-world scenario anytime soon, but if you happen to run into this nocturnal monster, it's likely to cause an end-of-you scenario and remove you from the world with extreme prejudice. There's no way of telling just how many lives it claimed before the SCP Foundation finally got it into containment, and perhaps it's best to just not think about that. SCP-280 is a black wraith-like apparition that floats at roughly average human height, with no visible legs or feet, as the lower portion of its body simply fades away before it reaches the ground. In its dormant state, the entity may appear to be little more than a shadow, easily dismissed, especially in dark environments. This comes as a natural result of the being's frightening ability to become intangible at will, and only become physical when it enters a state of active aggression toward a human target. In this intangible state, victims have even been known to walk through the shadowy mass by accident. While this doesn't lead to any detrimental physical effects, victims report that being inside the creature can lead to heightened states of anxiety, fear, and dread. Despite its body being wholly composed of an unidentifiable black matter, when exposed to light, the creature does begin to express a pair of glowing dots on its head similar to eyes, hence its frightening nickname. However, all tests indicate that these eyes aren't actually functional. Instead, they appear to be a kind of defensive measure, like false eyes on the carapace of an insect. These eyes are never shown when SCP-280 is advancing towards a victim, only when it is in retreat, though this is only one of the entity's several defensive responses. If an area where the creature is residing becomes fully illuminated, or a sudden flash of extremely bright light is directed against it, then it will immediately dematerialize and appear in a different area. The one positive thing that can be said about the hunting patterns of SCP-280 is that they're relatively predictable. The entity, it seems, only has an interest in human beings. When it selects a target, it will pursue them relentlessly, approaching in its intangible form with its arms extended in what many describe as a sleepwalker pose. In this state, you may finally notice 280's claws, long, thin, and razor sharp. It may silently approach while the victim is turned the other way, or while they sleep soundly in bed, or even when they're paralyzed in fear at the very sight of it. When SCP-280 closes the distance, it will begin to rip and tear at its victims with its claws, causing massive physical trauma and, in some cases, death. Attacks range from 1 to 5 minutes of being relentlessly clawed at by the beast. When the attack is over, it will simply expose its eyes, become intangible once more, and escape. You will not be able to overpower the creature. Foundation tests have shown that it has extreme physical strength, and it's capable of tearing apart solid steel with little effort. If it can't find any humans to victimize, then it will simply remain dormant, pressing itself up against a wall, in a dark corner, or within some other structure. Which is why, if ever you feel nervous about a certain dark corner in a room near you, it is best to remove yourself from the situation as quickly as possible and remain in a brightly lit area. It would perhaps be comforting to believe that SCP-280 is acting on some twisted form of animal instinct. After all, while the results may seem horrific to us, every organism has to eat, right? Well, sadly, that isn't the case here. SCP-280 does not appear to eat, sleep, or breathe to survive, and it never consumes any of the matter torn from its victims. The best working theory is that the entity simply enjoys the harm it causes, taking a degree of perverse pleasure in hunting down and murdering its targets. There is no better nature to appeal to here. The SCP Foundation's ability to study the creature's biology has also been stunted, in part due to the creature's highly aggressive nature, and also the fact that its selective intangibility makes gaining physical samples almost impossible. Even capturing and containing the creature in the first place came partially out of blind luck. It first came to Foundation attention after a series of mysterious locked-door murders in a small Mississippi township. In the most recent case, an entire family had been brutally murdered in their home, leaving only one survivor. A traumatized 9-year-old boy named David, who'd locked himself in the basement when he started to hear the screaming. He was so terrified by the things he saw that night that he remained in a catatonic state for weeks afterwards, completely unresponsive to outside stimulus. But one little detail saved his life. A flashlight was clasped in his white-knuckle grip, shining a bright beam of cold, white light onwards. When David was removed and placed into medical care, officers began searching the building for any kind of clues as to how the other 4 family members were murdered. However, during this investigation, the police were just as vulnerable as the victims who'd been so recently slain. While one officer was wandering around the attic, looking for any evidence they may have missed, SCP-280 emerged from the darkness and attacked, tearing into his body with its long, deadly claws. Luckily for the officer in question, he survived the incident, though he was badly wounded. His report on the matter, including the ardent claim that he was attacked by a being, quote, made from black smoke, caught the attention of SCP Foundation operatives embedded in the precinct. They soon took over the investigation and descended on the house, hoping to tag and bag whatever had been behind all these deaths. This would be easier said than done. While Foundation field agents canvassed the home, they simply walked past the creature multiple times, discounting it as a mere shadow. After all, it only had these easily identifiable glowing eyes when it was in a retreating position. Even when it entered its physical state, operatives brushing up against it generally dismissed the sensation as hair, clothing, or some other object touching them in the dark. This already bungled investigation got even worse when the Foundation decided to introduce high-intensity lights into the equation, hopefully flushing the creature out. This, of course, only caused it to dematerialize and appear elsewhere. The chase ended in an almost farcical fashion, a cavalcade of Foundation agents chasing a cloud of sneering black smoke across a Mississippi field at 2:30 a.m. Thankfully for the human race, the entity was, at the very least, eventually secured and contained. However, this wouldn't be the last time it was out of containment. During a series of tests with different types of illumination, intending to test SCP-280's reflexes, it disappeared from its chamber. It seemed almost to sink through the different levels of the illuminated site, before coming to rest at the containment chamber holding SCP-1591. This made for a fascinating accidental cross-test. You see, SCP-1591, to put it simply, is a unique sculpture of a star that emits an incredibly bright light, and this light will slowly make any being subject to its glow intangible before disappearing completely. When SCP-280 came before SCP-1591, it displayed its eyes, but did not retreat. In fact, it assumed a kneeling position and simply remained before the anomalous sculpture until it faded from existence. It then remanifested in its own containment chamber several hours later without incident. All things considered, it went pretty well as far as containment breaches involving deadly, human-hating monsters go. Because of its ability to demanifest and phase through solid objects, SCP-280 is incredibly difficult to contain, earning it the dreaded Keter object class. In order to avoid the risk of demanifestation, SCP-280 is contained in a 5x5 meter cell that is perpetually left in a state of total darkness. No equipment is to be left in the cell unsupervised at any time, and any items brought into the cell for testing must be removed when the testing is complete. Any staff members entering the chamber for tests must be equipped with infrared goggles, an infrared ID strobe, and also a strong flashlight to ward the creature off in the case that it becomes aggressive. If SCP-280 does attempt to attack anyone in the chamber, all attending staff are instructed to turn on their flashlights and turn the beams against the creature. No aggressive action is permitted, and staff members must remain at least 1 meter away from SCP-280 at all times for their own safety. And if you suddenly feel yourself getting a little nervous in an eerily dark room, I'd like you to remember this. The one thing more frightening than seeing eyes in the dark is not seeing them.
These winters are getting worse every year, that's for sure. The old cattle rancher doesn't know if it's the climate changing, God's judgment arriving, or if he's just getting older and struggling to keep up. Probably a strong mix of all of it. Whatever the cause, it doesn't change the facts. It's deathly cold out there. His ailing, elderly ma's health continues to deteriorate. He hasn't heard from his delivery driver Jorge in days, and on top of it all, his loyal dog Maribel is out there barking into the darkness of the barn. The rancher heads out to fetch her. He doesn't know what he'd do if she froze. He whistles, but she doesn't look back at him. She just carries on barking up that road into the snowy night. The rancher wades through the snow and peers in the direction she's looking. "There's nothing there, girl. Get inside." But Maribel keeps barking. She's insisting. He looks again. Is that? The rancher takes off running up the road. All thoughts of cold immediately gone from his mind, he races towards the figure as fast as he can. His frozen fingers fumble at the zipper on his parka. Icy wind stabs the insides of his lungs. Maribel shoots off ahead of him. There, he pulls the zipper down and wrestles the thick coat off of his shoulders just as he reaches the tiny figure. He drops to his knees and throws the coat over the shoulders of the little girl standing alone in the snow. Quick as he can, he wraps it tightly around her, pulling the hood up and over her head. He takes her tiny shoulders in his hands and gives her a shake. "You okay? Hello? Can you hear me?" The girl sways for a moment, then collapses. He catches her and in one deft motion scoops her into his arms and takes off back down the road in the direction of his farm. Where the hell had she come from? There are no buildings around here for miles. No one uses that road except Jorge. And in this weather, she couldn't have walked all the way over those mountains. She'd have frozen solid. He bites the finger of a glove and pulls it off. With his bare hand, he clasps one of hers. By the feel of her skin, she pretty much is frozen solid already. He needs to get her warmed up, now. He kicks open the front door and bundles inside with a flurry of snowflakes and an anxious dog at his heels. The fire's not quite dead yet, so he rushes over to the hearth and lays the little girl down next to it. He can barely see her at all wrapped up in his enormous coat. She doesn't seem to be moving. "Ma, I'm home. I found someone." The rancher grabs 2 dry logs from the side and throws them onto the fire. He piles kindling high on top of them and blows steadily into the embers at the bottom. They glow and swell in size. No taking yet. He blows again for longer, and again. He feels his head starting to swim. A crackle, a lick of flame. It's taken. Panting, he turns back to the bundled-up coat on the floor with the child inside. Still no movement. A sickening knot tightens his stomach. What if she's... No, don't let yourself think that. Not yet. He reaches down and gently undoes the zipper on the parka. His trembling fingers push back the hood. She's pale. Deathly pale. Her dark brown hair is wet and clings to her scalp. The tips are frozen. At a guess,
She must only be 9 years old. Eyes closed, lips a sickening blue. But that's not the color that scares him the most. On her neck, there's red. Delicately as he can, the rancher takes the coat off her shoulders and hangs it up by the fire. She's dressed only in a plaid shirt, way too big for her. It looks like an adult's shirt, similar to an old one he used to have years ago. But on her neck, her hands, her feet, is that same deep red, layers of blood frozen to her skin. He sits back, his mind blank. He's seen that much blood before. Sure he has. When you work with cattle, it's an unfortunate part of the job. He's seen cows bleed out during childbirth. The girl in front of him, she's the same color as those orphaned calves that lie crying on the floor. A groaning sound fills the room. The rancher looks across at the armchair where his ma sits. She doesn't look at him, doesn't look at the girl on the floor. She just stares into the fire, same way she always does. Ma groans again, trying to express something she doesn't understand, being in a world without living in it.
Ma, it's okay. Sorry if I startled you. We have a guest with us.
But she just keeps on groaning and staring into the fire. The rancher buries his head in his hands and lets out a deep breath. Only the sound of his breath is joined by another, a tiny breath rattling and rasping through a damaged child's throat, trying its best to keep its host alive. The rancher opens his eyes and stares at the child. She isn't conscious, not by a long shot, but she's breathing, a little at a time. The icicles in her hair have turned into rounded droplets of water that glow by the heat of the fire. He snaps back to his senses. He's not doing her much if she's just lying there soaking wet. He runs off upstairs and grabs some towels and a fresh flannel shirt to wear. After several minutes of drying her off, he's confident enough that he's got most of the water off. There's still a lot of blood caked to her skin, but as far as he can tell, there's no wound anywhere that it could have come from. Brow furrowed, he leaves her under a bundle of blankets and fills up the kettle with water. Hanging it carefully over the fire, he walks over to the cabinet and fishes out a tin of cocoa from the top shelf. Hasn't been used in years, but should still be fine. He would make it with milk, but she's probably dehydrated. Lifting the kettle's lid with the poker, the rancher pours the brown powder inside and waits for it to boil. The little girl's eyes are open now. She's staring into the flames. Her lips are looking a little more pink, her skin a little more blotchy.
You're safe here. Just stay by the fire and warm up a bit. You like cocoa?
The little girl drags her eyes away from the flames. Her expression is mostly blank. She looks too tired to be confused.
I don't know. I think you will. Ma always gave me cocoa.
Okay. And with that, the farmhouse falls silent. The little girl stares into the fire. The rancher watches her, finally feeling the wave of exhaustion crashing over him. His ma has fallen asleep in her armchair. Only Maribel stays awake through the whole night, staying close to the little girl by the fire, occasionally licking her toes to try and warm them up. By the morning, the snow stopped, but the huge drifts remain. As the rancher walks across to the barn, he finds it hard to believe that just a few hours ago, the winds were whipping at his face as hard as they were. The world this morning is totally still. What the rancher finds even harder to believe is that there's a little girl in his house right now, fast asleep by the fire. He checked her forehead when he woke up this morning, and she miraculously hadn't caught a fever. She couldn't have been out in that weather for too long, but it only made the question more mysterious. Where did she come from? Maribel didn't get up this morning. From all of the excitement last night, she must have been too tired for today. Walking through the crisp morning air, he can't really blame her. He shoulders the barn door open. A column of steam curls out of the opening. All of that warmth, humidity, and cattle smell is strangely comforting this morning. But as the rancher goes around checking on all the cows inside, he very quickly discovers a problem. They're thin. Way too thin. Some of them look to be on the verge of starvation. He'd missed it last night as he drove them down in the dark, but in the warm glow of the barn's lights, it's unmistakable. These cows haven't been eating properly. He pours out several sacks of grain for them into the troughs, and they all gather around hungrily, filling both their stomachs as fast as they can. The rancher leans on the railing for a moment, confused. Even in this cold, there was still plenty of green grass for them up on the ridge. That's why he'd taken them up there. They should have had no trouble eating until the snow came in last night. He doesn't like this one bit. Last time Jorge had driven down and collected some of the meat, he'd had a few questions about the quantity being smaller than usual. Were the cows sick at all? Not that the rancher could tell. But now, looking at them, it's clear as day. Something's up.
You hungry?
The little girl nods. They sit across the table from one another, eating homemade bread and soup. Ma stays over by the fire. Maribel slowly wanders over to the kitchenette and flops down on the floor, exhausted.
Where are you from? The girl shrugs her shoulders. You know how you got out here? Remember anything from last night?
The little girl just eats her soup and shakes her head. She doesn't look particularly scared or worried, just a little confused.
Where are your parents? Do you have parents?
Again, the little girl shrugs. The rancher sits back and folds his arms. He's tried to call into town, but his phone line's gone out in the blizzard. Not much to be done until the snow clears. He's got a good relationship with the police around here. If he explains the situation, then it'll all be okay.
What do you know? Can you remember anything from last night?
It was dark. The girl slurps her soup. I was hungry. So hungry. Then I saw the light and I went towards that.
My car?
No. Well, yes, later on it was your car, but before it wasn't.
What was the light then? Where were you?
I don't know. It was just the light. Now he's even more confused. But try as he might, the rancher can't figure any of it out. And try as she might, the little girl can't remember anything more precise than that. The pair of them hop into the car and drive back out up the road that afternoon. The snow is piled so high that the rancher is having to get out twice as often as he did the previous night to clear a track for them. He isn't actually sure what he's brought her out here looking for. Clues, maybe? He almost laughs at himself at the thought, but that's probably the best word for it. If he can figure out how she got here, then he can work on understanding who she is and how to get her home. There's the damage to the phone line. One of the masts has collapsed, sagging heavily on the lines. That's not something he can fix on his own. No, sir. Looks like he'll have to wait for the snow to melt before making any phone calls again. That could be in 1 week. That could be in 3 months. He glances at the child sitting in the passenger seat. She's just staring out of the window in amazement, wrapped up in as many layers as he could put on her. They may be stuck together for a while. A lurch. The pickup plunges dangerously to the left. The rancher slams on the brakes and it comes to a stop just in time. A large chunk of snow in front of them comes loose and slips off the side of the road. It tumbles down into a gully that he hadn't even spotted. With all this snow on the ground, he has no frame of reference. Everything is just white.
Stay here.
The rancher opens the door and climbs out. He wishes Maribel was with him, but she'd wanted to stay home again. Poor dog. She must really be going through it if she wasn't even up for a ride in the pickup. Carefully as he can, testing every step before making it, the rancher creeps over to the edge of the gully. It's bigger than he thought, much bigger. It continues down, more and more sharply for a few hundred feet, all the way down into a... Oh no. There's a semi down there, a big rig, warped and bent, lying on the rocks. Just a glance is enough to tell the rancher it's Jorge's, but he just keeps staring at it in disbelief. Can't be. But it is.
Stay in the car.
The rancher reaches past the little girl and into the back seat. Grabbing a pair of crampons and some rope, he straightens up and looks at the girl. She knows it's serious. He can see the concern on her face.
Stay in the car,
he repeats. By the time the rancher makes it down to the truck, his legs and back are killing him. All this work over the last 24 hours is going to start taking its toll sooner or later, but some things have to be done. He pauses by the semi. It's on its side. He'll have to climb up onto it and try to open the door. Some things have to be done. He hoists himself up and manages to clamber onto the metal door. It's badly crumpled, and the window is smashed in. He doesn't fancy his chances of being able to get it open. One look through the window shows him that he won't want to do that anyway. Blood coats every inch of the inside of Jorge's truck. The cabin that the rancher is so used to seeing and sitting in is almost unrecognizable. Smashed glass is sprinkled across every surface with a dark brownish-red layer of gore frozen into everything else. There, in the midst of it all, still wearing a seatbelt, is Jorge's body. It dangles like a limp carcass at a butcher shop, like the cows he hangs in the slaughterhouse. And like those cows, a large chunk of Jorge is missing. His fat stomach is gone, not just cut open, but gone. The tops of his thighs, too, and much of his chest. So much of him is just missing. Open arteries and lifeless nerves dangle in place. That must have been a hell of a crash. The rancher reaches over and pulls Jorge's cap down over his eyes. Not much else to be done right now. No way he can clean this mess up by himself. But as the rancher climbs up the valley, his mind starts to connect some dots that leave a sick feeling in his stomach. He's seen that much blood somewhere else, or rather, on someone else, just last night. He slams the door to the pickup shut and starts to drive back down the track. Since the snow stopped, All of the drifts that he'd cleared earlier remain clear. It's only a few minutes' drive back down to the farm. He doesn't say a word the whole way, and neither does the little girl. She clearly senses something's up. The sick feeling in his stomach remains. He pulls up the handbrake, and the two of them sit in silence outside the farmhouse.
There's a truck in that valley. Did you know that?
Yes?
Is that where you came from last night?
I don't remember.
Was he... The rancher stops. Jorge didn't have any kids. What were you doing in his truck?
I don't know.
Was he...
The rancher can't bring himself to accuse his best friend of the words that almost left his mouth.
Do you think you might not remember because something bad happened to you?
I don't know. The rancher closes his eyes for a long moment. Silence fills the pickup.
Come on, let's get inside.
But inside wasn't the safe haven he'd been hoping for. Ma's been throwing up. Not just once, but a few times. She's distressed, groaning aimlessly for someone to come and save her. Maribel is pacing around the room, yelping and whining. The rancher immediately goes upstairs to get some rags to clean up with. Perfect timing, as usual. But he stops in his tracks when he comes back down. His ma's stopped moaning. The little girl is kneeling by the armchair, holding the old lady's hand. The room is calm. The little girl gently places the frail hand back on the armrest and comes over to take the rags from the rancher. Returning to the old lady, the girl goes about mopping her up as best she can. Maribel slumps back down on the floor. And that is how the four of them exist for the next few days. Ma gets sicker steadily, but the little girl stays by her side all day long, caring for her in every way. The rancher's glad of that. It gives him the time he needs to help his cows outside. None of them are in a good shape. Whatever it is, they're still getting thinner. He feeds them all the grain they'd normally need, and then some, and they always finish it off. Yet none of them are getting any fatter. The rancher leans on the railing, trusty dog by his side. His energy is starting to really lag behind what he needs. The last couple of days, even though he hasn't done all that much, have totally taken it out of him.
What do you think it is, Maribel?
He looks down at his little friend. She's looking thinner too, actually, but she's been eating just fine. It hits him. Tapeworms. As soon as the word comes into his head, it makes total sense. His cows, his entire herd by the looks of things, have been riddled with tapeworms.
Oh, hell.
He hasn't got anywhere near the amount of medicine needed to give some to all of them. Even if he did, a lot of them are looking pretty far gone. The chance of reinfection would be high. He needs supplies. He needs Jorge. Maribel whines softly next to him. He knows what they have to do. Laying Maribel down carefully by the fire, the rancher administers the tapeworm medicine. For a few hours, they lie there together. He strokes her side, waiting for her to pass it. The little girl watches over his shoulder. His ma sits back in her chair, mumbling to herself. He hasn't talked to the little girl anymore about Jorge yet. He isn't sure what there is to say. Maybe he should ask if Jorge was sick. After all, the cows clearly have had these tapeworms since before the other night. Jorge may have picked up contaminated meat from him last time he came. Maybe. Maribel passes the worm on the rug. Ugh, the smell. The rancher uses the tongs next to the fire to pick the worm up. It's long and pale, and dead. He tosses it into the fire and puts the tongs in the flames for a bit to sterilize them. The worm sizzles and pops in the flames. The sound makes his stomach crawl. The rancher glances around and sees the little girl staring at the tapeworm. He looks past the girl to his ma sitting in the chair. Her turn next. But as that night and the following morning reveal, it's too late. His ma's groans turn into cries of pain. She openly sobs by the fire, clutching at her stomach. Every time the rancher tries to give her the medicine, she just vomits it back up. Each time she vomits, there's more and more blood mixed in. The little girl gets more and more upset. It's not fair on her to have to witness something this traumatic and disgusting. There's nowhere else for her to go. She shouldn't even be here at all. The fact that she is means she has to help. That's all there is to it. By sunrise, his ma has passed away. There is nasty red bruising all across her abdomen, which tells him she must have bled out internally from this worm. He'd been too late to realize what was wrong. Too late with the cows, and too late with his ma. He covers his ma with a blanket and tells the little girl not to go and wash her hands. He needs to check on the cattle. Sure enough, during the night, a handful of them died too. The calves. They were the ones to go first whenever something like this happened. Mother cows stood over their calves, licking their heads, willing them to wake up. The rancher drags each body out to the back and burns them. He can't risk any more contamination. As the carcasses burn, he allows himself to cry. But when the rancher comes back into the house, it's full of noise, a noise that takes his brain a long time to comprehend. Crying, but not his own, not the little girl either. No, it was a new sound. It was a baby, a newborn child screaming at the top of its lungs. The rancher can't believe what he's looking at. The little girl is sitting at the hearth with Maribel at her feet. In her arms, drenched in blood, is a baby. The girl looks up at him and smiles sweetly. "It's a boy." Then she turns around to his ma's body under the blanket. A sickening red patch soaks through the fabric, right over where her stomach would be. "What the hell happened here?" "I've got a little brother." Securing and containing SCP-1003 has proven challenging. This is largely because the tapeworm that causes all of this damage is virtually indistinguishable from Echinococcus granulosus, the common variety of tapeworm that causes hydatid disease. The tapeworm, designated SCP-1003-1, follows the same life cycle as other regular worms. Its eggs come into contact with an animal through contaminated meat, saliva, or unclean surfaces and are ingested. Once inside the gut, they grow and latch onto the inside of the digestive tract, where they feed on the nutrients of the food traveling past them, steadily growing bigger and stronger. Once mature, they lay eggs, which pass out in the animal's excrement to continue the process. Infections spread quickly, particularly in unsanitary conditions amongst livestock, and can often be difficult to contain, as by the time the symptoms, nausea, weight loss, fever, start to manifest in the infected, the worms have likely already reproduced and have a new generation growing in the guts of other animals. As far as the Foundation is aware, SCP-1003 follows this normal pattern in all observed animals except humans. When a human ingests an egg from this tapeworm, a very different creature starts to grow in their gut. Human embryos, with the same genetic code as the tapeworm, begin to form. The rate of their growth is greatly accelerated, however. By just 8 weeks, they are as mature as the typical 3-week-old neonate or newborn child, although similar in size to an 8-week-old embryo at 13 to 16 centimeters. Many eggs usually enter this fertilization period, but almost all of them die before having a chance to develop much beyond the early stages. They stand the best chance of survival when buried in the hepatic tissue, where they can absorb plenty of nutrients from their host. The host at this point usually starts to experience mild symptoms, lethargy, the occasional stomach cramp, nothing particularly severe yet. The embryos that survive soon develop rows of temporary, razor-sharp teeth. At this point, passively absorbing nutrients is no longer enough for them. They bury their teeth into the soft tissue surrounding them and begin to eat. Once they enter this stage, their rate of growth increases exponentially the more flesh they consume. Eventually burrowing out into the world, the tapeworm child is born drenched in blood. The size and apparent age of the child that emerges from the corpse are determined by the size of the person they consume. For example, the child eating its way out of the rancher's maw appeared to be only a 10-month-old child, as there was very little of the frail old woman for it to eat. By contrast, the little girl who emerged from Jorge's gut had plenty of fat to feast on, and so was able to grow to the size of a 9-year-old. Once the child emerges, the teeth that they'd used to eat their way out quickly become loose and are replaced by regular human teeth. The children themselves have no memory at all of where they've come from or what they are. They have the same motor and linguistic skills that a regular child would possess at their age. Nothing, aside from their DNA, marks them out as being any different from the children around them, blissfully ignorant, just like the children around them. It is theorized that many of these children end up in orphanages. With no birth certificates or identifiable parents, they fall through the gaps in the system, quickly lost to the world. The only way to really track them at all is to follow the infections they cause. You see, these tapeworm children have one final curse they must live with. Their bodily fluids, their saliva, and sweat contain the same tapeworm protoscolex that will develop into SCP-1003-1 as soon as it is ingested by another creature, making the cycle start all over again. If you want to track down a tapeworm child, and I highly advise that you don't, all you have to do is follow the trail of nasty stomach infections, internal bleeding, and freak pregnancies amongst the outcasts of society. It, unfortunately, will not take long. There are currently 10 instances of SCP-1003-2 in containment. The children live in Bioresearch Area 13 under strict supervision. Researchers are only permitted to enter their cells whilst wearing full-body biohazard suits, but first must have Level 4 security clearance and must have written permission, and can only enter with specific research goals agreed upon. All staff are regularly tested for the presence of any kind of tapeworms in their system. No other animals are permitted in this facility. The explorer slashes his way through the jungle, using his large machete to hack through the thick undergrowth. He suddenly stops and turns around. "Which way was it again?" His local guide answers, but he must wait for him to finish and his research assistant to translate. "He says to continue straight. It's just another 100 yards or so." The gentleman explorer offers a quick nod before turning to resume cutting his way through the forest. The guide was right, though, because after a short way, the dense jungle suddenly opens up, giving way to a clearing that reveals one of the most incredible things the explorer has ever seen. Just ahead of him, rising out of the forest, is a massive, ancient stone temple. A huge step pyramid of solid stone, intricately carved and covered with elaborate statues. The colossal structure looks like it has been abandoned for centuries, if not longer, with nature having done its best to reclaim the stone and cover the pyramid in vines and other plants. The team approaches the temple, but stops in front of a stone monument that stands in front of it. The explorer traces its carved lines with his finger, knocking the dirt away to reveal its weathered pictograph. It appears to depict a sort of creature, but with large spread wings instead of arms. Perhaps a kind of ritualistic garb, the explorer says to his assistant. The assistant hastily scribbles in her notebook, trying to document everything she can. Yes, this is definitely a priest-like figure of some kind. Maybe a leader of this temple, thanks to the connection he shares to their... The explorer's musings are interrupted by his guide, who he angrily spins around to face. Yes, what? What is it? His research assistant translates for him as usual. He says that we should go no further, that it's too dangerous. Nonsense, replies the explorer. We came all this way, and who knows what fantastic treasures await us inside. Historical treasures, I mean. Artifacts. Treasures of knowledge, of course. Of course, replies his assistant, before following her boss as he starts making his way up the step pyramid, as the guide holds true to his stated intentions and waits near the edge of the jungle. The two of them walk through an entrance that leads into a long, dark hallway. With only torches to light their way, it's impossible to see just how deep it runs into the temple. The explorer stops to examine the walls, which are covered in even more carvings. He can see that there are complicated geometric patterns, but also many more depictions of the same winged creature that was on the monument outside. Here, though, the creatures are depicted in moments of action. They appear to be running, chasing, reaching out and grabbing for people. They are shown attacking them, picking them up, carrying them away to... Right where the pictograph story should reveal its climax is a chunk of missing wall. It must have fallen off at some point. Oh well, the explorer declares before moving on to explore more of the temple. His assistant doesn't follow, though. She spots several pieces of stone on the floor underneath the missing panel and kneels down to get a closer look. She begins to gather them together, rearranging the various pieces back into their original form. Meanwhile, the explorer's attention has been caught by something else. On the other side of the hall is a statue of a tall, proud warrior, and in his hand, he clutches a large bejeweled spear, the gemstones adorning it sparkling in the torchlight. The explorer reaches out and grips the spear's handle. He begins to pull, perhaps being a little rougher than one should with an ancient artifact, but he wants this fabulous jeweled piece, and even more than the spear itself, he wants the acclaim it will bring him back home. As the explorer pulls on the spear, his research assistant moves the final piece of the broken wall carving into position. She holds her torch over it to get a better look, and she gasps. The winged creatures are carrying people away, but that isn't the end of the story. They are bringing them somewhere, and she can even see now that they are being presented to an even bigger winged creature. It's a monster that is feeding on the people. The assistant turns to tell the explorer what she has found, and just as she does, she watches as he is finally able to rend the spear loose from the statue's grip. The statue finally letting go causes him to fall backwards to the ground, where he lies, marveling at the beautiful jeweled spear in his hands. "Look out!" yells his assistant. The explorer doesn't notice that the statue is precariously rocking back and forth, and he rolls out of the way just before it crashes down right where he was lying and admiring the spear. "Are you okay?" she asks as she rushes over. "I think so," he tells her. "Just a little bump on the head. Nothing that can't be fixed up by a good..." "By a good what?" she asks, but he seems distracted by something behind her. By God, what is that?" He points, and the research assistant turns to see something emerging from a hole in the wall where the statue once stood. It's one of the creatures from the wall carvings, a bizarre half-man, half-lizard with wings instead of arms. though there's no flesh at all. The creature is completely made of bone. The two of them both scream at the skeletonized half-human, and the creature screams right back at them, emitting a shrill, high-pitched squeal. Suddenly, more of the creatures begin to emerge from the hole in the wall, with others crawling out of previously unseen and unnoticed holes in the walls and ceiling. The creatures rush towards them, blocking their way out of the temple, and the pair have no choice but to run further down the darkened hallway. As they run, more of the creatures emerge from holes in the darkness, screaming at them and grasping at them with the sharp claws on the end of their wings. As they round a corner, one reaches out and grasps the explorer's ankle, causing him to trip and fall hard onto the stone floor. His assistant rushes to his aid, but as she is helping him up, two more of the creatures appear behind her and envelop her in their bony, winged arms. The explorer stands up and stabs at one of them with a jeweled spear as they drag her into a dark hole, but a third tears it from his hands. With more still coming down the hallway behind him, the explorer has to run. The hallway in front of him looks to have collapsed at some point in the past, and he has no choice but to enter one of the dark tunnels that has been carved into the rock. The narrow tunnel winds back and forth, and the explorer is unsure of where he is going or what his plan is. He rounds a bend, and the tunnel opens up into a gigantic room. The ceiling must be over 100 feet high, and he can't see the furthest walls, with the only light emitted by his torch and a dim beam of sunlight coming down through a hole high up in the ceiling. He notices, too, that it has suddenly gone quiet. He turns and looks back at the tunnel he has just emerged from, and notices that the sound of the horrible creatures that were chasing him has ceased. The explorer hears something coming from deeper in the giant room and turns back, peering into the darkness. There, in a single beam of light, he sees one of the winged creatures, but it is moving strangely, as if it isn't walking, but floating up into the air. And that's because it isn't walking. As it gets closer, the explorer can see that the winged creature is stuck on the tooth of a giant, monstrous mouth. The huge winged creature emerges from the darkness into the beam of light, tossing back its giant head to consume the creature that was stuck in its teeth, its bones loudly cracking in its mouth. Now, in the light, the explorer can see that the monster, which itself must be hundreds of feet long, is a huge flying lizard of some kind, or at least it was at one time, since now the majority of its body is made only of bone. What scraps of flesh are left hang off in rotten ribbons. The monster opens its mouth and roars at the explorer. Its foul breath smells like a mausoleum opening up, hitting the explorer in the face. The explorer tries to run, but the monster swipes out with a bony wing that still has a few blackened strips of leathery skin on it and knocks him to the ground. He is pinned to the floor with a huge spiny claw as the creature opens its mouth, roaring again before moving its head down to start feasting on its meal. The explorer closes his eyes, bracing himself to be eaten alive, when the creature suddenly lets out an ear-piercing scream. The explorer opens his eyes to see the jeweled spear sticking out of one of the few spots of flesh remaining on the creature's clawed foot, and gripping the shaft is his assistant. She looks a little worse for wear, but she's alive. She offers him a hand to help him up. They need to get out of there. But first, the explorer pulls the spear from the monster's claw. The two start running, doing everything they can to avoid the monster as it claws and swipes at them. They spot an illuminated opening at the other end of the vast room, and with no other option, start heading towards it. As they get closer, they can see it's just what they needed: daylight, escape. They both slide to a stop at the cusp of the opening, nearly tumbling over the edge. On the other side, the tunnel opening up out of the side of the temple gives way to nothing but air, and a drop of hundreds of feet down to the jungle below. They turn to see the monster still rushing towards them, and without time to think any longer, they both jump, just seconds before the creature snaps its bony jaws in the place where they were standing. It's too big to fit anything more than its mouth out the door, and it howls and screams as they fall through the air before crashing into the ground below. The assistant slowly opens her eyes to see someone. It's their guide. He is cradling her head and asking if she's okay. She sits up, dazed and more than a little bruised from her fall. She asks the guide where the explorer is, if he's all right, and the guide lowers his eyes, looking as though he'd rather not answer. He points next to them without looking, and the assistant turns to see the explorer lying on the ground a few feet away from them, his body impaled on the jeweled spear. History is full of tales and legends about gods, monsters, and everything in between. But not all of these are just stories. And in fact, sometimes the reality is even more terrifying than what we could envision. And that is exactly the case when it comes to SCP-4959, also known as the Teotihuacan Pterodactylactery. SCP-4959 is a huge creature that resembles a pterosaur, which were flying reptiles that existed during the Mesozoic era. While pterosaurs have been extinct for millions of years, SCP-4959 is very much alive, or at the very least, animate. This massive anomaly, whose wingspan stretches approximately 50 meters, is in a living state of decomposition, with roughly 70% of its flesh having rotted or otherwise fallen away, leaving only small patches of skin and decaying tissue clinging to its bones. The flesh that does remain shows no signs of further decomposition, though, as if it is permanently locked into this specific stage of advanced decay. Tests of 4959's flesh have shown no apparent abnormalities, save for a slightly higher than expected concentration of iridium. Its eyes are no longer present, but the eye sockets somehow shine with a bright green light, though the source of this luminescence is unknown. When angered, the creature also emits a multicolored corona of fire from its wings, skull, and neck. SCP-4959 was discovered in a gigantic chamber beneath the Temple of the Feathered Serpent in Teotihuacan, Mexico. A number of tunnels connect to the chamber, and these, too, are anything but empty. Lurking within the temple's many twisting passages are entities that have been designated SCP-4959-A. These humanoid-sized creatures appear to be constructed of various human and pterosaur bones, creating an all-new creature that is an amalgamation of both. The bones are connected to a central stone-like heart, but it is unknown if this heart was carved from stone, or if it was at one time a real heart that turned to stone through a process of ossification, nor is it fully understood just how the bones are connected to it or stay together. The 4959-A entities also have a number of varying adornments on their bodies, which can include strips of decayed fabric, feathers, and precious stones that resemble those worn by the indigenous people who resided in the area many centuries ago. SCP-4959 is carnivorous, though it is unknown if it requires or simply desires to feed. Regardless, it seems to be the task of the SCP-4959-A entities to bring it meals, since the 4959 creature itself is too large to leave its chamber beneath the temple. The hallways and passages that originally connected the temple to the chamber housing SCP-4959 have all collapsed, and the only tunnels now leading to it were most likely dug into the rock and earth by the 4959-A entities. They searched through these tunnels, most often working at night, looking for small animals like birds and lizards, but also occasionally finding a larger animal or even a human who has somehow found themselves inside. They will then bring their live prey directly to the giant pterosaur, offering them up as both a meal and a sacrifice. SCP-4959 will then proceed to eat the prey whole, sometimes consuming the 4959-A entity at the same time as well. The temple itself is covered in carvings and murals that give numerous hints as to the origin of SCP-4959. While it is unknown just how it got there, it appears as though the local people discovered the creature within its chamber and regarded it as an avatar of their feathered serpent god, or perhaps another unknown deity. A temple was constructed at the site, and they soon began making sacrifices to the god creature that lived beneath, starting with small animals but then progressing to human sacrifices on important holy days. There is also something else shown in the murals that looks to be of great importance. It seems as though SCP-4959 possessed a sort of heart, which is depicted as a large gemstone, described as being red as blood and bright as the rising sun. This gemstone was previously housed at the pinnacle of the temple, though its current location is unknown. Following intense study of the site by SCP Foundation historians, a narrative was pieced together that may explain at least some of what happened there. It seems as though there was an uprising within the local population in roughly the 6th century AD. A conflict had arisen amongst the people as to whether this really was a god, or something else, something evil. Those who doubted the deific origins of SCP-4959 wrested control of the temple and journeyed into its depths to attempt to kill the creature. The many scorch marks on the wall are a testament to the battle that likely took place, and while they suffered many losses, it appears as though they were at least able to seal the chamber shut. It is currently unknown what became of the great jewel on top of the temple after this, but its location is of great interest to the Foundation, given that it may well be the source of SCP-4959's longevity. SCP-4959 has been classified as Euclid, and it continues to be contained within the chamber beneath the Temple of the Feathered Serpent, though all of the tunnel entrances leading into it have been blocked by reinforced gates. If new ones are discovered as the result of SCP-4959-A's continued tunneling, they too are to be gated and sealed. Once per week, a large live animal, most often a cow, is deposited down a shaft that leads directly to the chamber, and so far, this seems to be keeping SCP-4959 content to stay within its tomb. Just what is SCP-4959? And what are the half-man, half-pterosaur creatures who serve it? Are they former human sacrifices, now destined to live an eternity in servitude to their master? If SCP-4959 was a god at one point, the fact that we are now the ones responsible for feeding it and keeping it happy means that, in a sense, we are the ones serving it now.
Mom, come on, open up. This isn't funny. The college student stands alone at the front door of her parents' house, tucked deep within the endless honeycomb of suburbia. It's a few minutes past midnight, and even the streetlights are out. What little she can see, she sees by the light of the indifferent moon. She calls up at the window.
Can you just let me in? Please, we can talk about this.
Nothing. Just closed curtains. She tries her phone, but her battery's dead. She must have used the last of her juice to hail an Uber on the way over. Less than an hour ago, the student was having the time of her life at a party a few neighborhoods away. She was back home from her out-of-state college for summer vacation, sleeping in her old childhood bedroom. Truth be told, she wasn't happy to be back, and didn't get the sense that her mom and dad were happy to have her back either. The student had never quite seen eye to eye with her mother. She was a stern, old-fashioned woman who could never really accept her daughter's lifestyle. In fact, she never even wanted her to leave for college. She always just wanted her little princess to find a nice husband and settle down just like she did. She'd taken her precious darling choosing to leave the nest as a personal slap in the face. Tensions had simmered since the student's return. Snide muttered comments, poisonous glances, meaningful silences as they passed in the halls. And all that had spilled over into one spectacular shouting match because the student had the audacity to say she was going out to a party tonight.
You are my daughter and this is my house,
her mother screeched, veins rising in her forehead.
Do you think you can make a fool out of me?
The student stormed out after that, but she heard her mother's cruel words echoing out behind her.
If you're out past midnight, don't expect to be let back in.
The student had thought it was an idle threat, and yet, here she is, standing on the porch of her own family home, lights off inside and out, stranded in the dark, in oppressive silence. She could hammer on the door, keep ringing the doorbell, maybe even try to throw something at the window, but if she made a scene, she might attract the attention of her neighbors, and that would only make the fallout tomorrow even worse. No, this place is a lost cause. She sighs and walks away from the house, beginning the slow, mournful walk down the sidewalk out of the neighborhood. Her best bet is going to a friend's place and crashing for the night, then trying to mend fences with her mom in the morning. Everything would be easier then. That's when it starts to rain. The low, steady hiss of falling raindrops all around her. She feels her clothes soaking through and her makeup running down her face. At this time of night, it feels so cold. It takes everything in her to hold back tears. Her friend's place is about 2 miles away. That's a long walk on a frigid, rainy night, and she feels utterly exhausted. It seems like nobody on Earth cares about her anymore. That's when the uniform sound of rainfall is broken by the engine of an approaching car, the glow of its headlights slicing through the gloom. For a moment, she feels a pang of fear, until she sees who's driving the car. It's a kind-looking middle-aged couple, a husband and wife, with soft, inviting features. They look like the kind of people she'd have seen at her mom and dad's garden parties as a kid. Friendly, neighborly, even. She feels like she can trust them. The car slides to a stop, the window rolling down. The husband leans out, his face twisted up in visible concern.
You okay, honey?
He asks.
You need a lift?
She hesitates for a moment. She thinks of a lifetime of advice given to her by her mom. Don't talk to strangers. Never get in an unfamiliar car. But all that advice feels a little hollow coming from the same woman who locked her out and put her in this very situation. Rather than walking in the rain, she decides to accept the kindness and get into the back of the car. The husband and wife are so polite, so kind. They offer her soothing words as they drive in the direction of her friend's place.
Looks like the rain's clearing up,
the husband says after a moment, as the pitter-patter of raindrops on the front window comes to a full stop.
Thank goodness.
The student sees her friend's house approaching, but the car passes it and keeps driving. That's when she feels her heart sinking in her chest. You just missed it, the student says, trying to remain calm. The wife looks back past the seat and smiles at her. The The student can't see anything that resembles life behind her eyes.
Can you swim, honey?
She says. What follows seems like something out of a nightmare. The wife pulls a small revolver while the husband drives, and they tell her to stay calm. If she stays calm, everything is going to be fine. If she screams or tries to escape, well, she'll live to regret that. For a little while, anyway. They take her to a suburban home, a nice mid-level McMansion. They force her out of the car and walk her into the yard. She's expecting to see some terrifying torture dungeon or a shallow grave already dug for her. But no, it's a normal yard, with a vast lawn, a supply shed, and a decent pool, with a pair of cinder blocks and a chain sitting next to it.
You're going to be okay, honey,
The husband says.
It's all going to be over soon. You just need to do what we say for just a little longer.
Yes, dear.
The wife says.
This isn't our first rodeo.
That much seems obvious. The chains are tied around her ankles at gunpoint. The other end is attached to the cinder blocks before they're thrown into the pool, dragging the student along with them into the water. It rushes up all around her. She draws in a deep breath and prepares to fight against drowning. But then she surfaces, her head just above the water. She looks down, sees the chain tethering her to the cinder blocks below, but the chain is just long enough to keep her head above water level. She's trapped, but she's still floating. Confused, she turns and sees the husband and wife standing on the edge of the pool, each wearing a manic grin. The husband checks his watch.
Not long now,
he says.
This is my favorite part,
the wife adds, seemingly barely able to contain her glee. The student floats in the pool, equal parts terrified and confused. There are glowing blue lights underneath the water. The jets bubble. Other than the fact that she's been kidnapped, nothing even really seems all that strange. Then she feels it. As the minutes pass, the water starts to feel strangely hot. It tingles against her skin. Is this even water? No, something's wrong. She looks down and sees that her skin, it's starting to bubble like boiling water. Every inch of her flesh, her clothes, her hair, they're fizzing. She's melting away like some human bath bomb before her very eyes. She can't help but scream. The husband and wife on the sidelines are laughing and clapping in delight. And the student can't scream for long. In a few moments, she won't have the throat or lungs to scream with. And in a few minutes more, there won't be anything left at all. The next morning, the student's mother wakes up to a quiet house. The sun is shining in through the window. Her daughter's bedroom is empty.
That girl, she says to herself, when's she going to grow up?
Little does she know, she will never grow up now. And perhaps if she hadn't locked her out that night, it would all have gone down very differently. No trace of the girl will ever be found. Today, we're dealing with an extremely dangerous filtration system with anomalous capabilities. But, my fellow researchers, do you know what's even more dangerous than anomalously filtering water? Not filtering water at all. According to another reputable three-letter agency, the World Health Organization, or WHO, around 1 million people die from illnesses as a result of consuming contaminated water every year. And because I'm all about containing horrifying threats to the human race, I'm teaming up with #TeamWater, a charity initiative that aims to raise $40 million to help 2 million people get long-term access to clean, safe, drinkable water. If you're able to donate, you get the official DrBob seal of approval, metaphorically speaking. And if you can't, you can still help by sharing this video around and spreading the word about #TeamWater. That's one joint operation that certainly shouldn't be classified. Unlike the matters concerning SCP-242, otherwise known as the Self-Cleaning Pool. Like many codenames assigned to anomalies by the SCP Foundation, the pun belies just how dangerous and horrifying this seemingly innocent pool can really be. 4.5 meters wide by 9 meters long, with a depth ranging from 1 meter deep on both ends to 1.5 meters deep in the center, and a total volume of approximately 53,000 liters. It was discovered after the mysterious disappearance of a New Mexico retiree who'd been an out-of-state landlord for the better part of his life. According to the tenancy records of the house, tenants had changed frequently, something that had always perplexed the landlord. His tenants just seemed to stop paying the rent and disappear without giving any kind of advance notice. After retiring, he decided to live at the property himself.
and after taking a dip in the pool, he found out firsthand exactly what had happened to all of his tenants, and just like them, he was never seen again. That's when the SCP Foundation got involved and discovered what they really had on their hands here: a swimming pool capable of total matter transmutation of anything placed inside it into completely sterile, chemically pure water. And this water is quite literally as pure as any water could be, so much so that it remains pure even when placed into contaminated sources. In order to test this, Foundation researchers dyed a tank full of regular water red before pouring a glass of water from SCP-242 into the tank. The added anomalous water remained pure, floating as a transparent orb amidst the dyed liquid. It seems that almost anything can be transmuted, but the amount of time the transmutation takes will depend on the severity of the contaminant added to the water. Ordinary river water was completely purified in 7 minutes. Mucky and stagnant water from a local pond was rendered clean in less than 20 minutes, and the pool was even able to purify 50,000 pounds of tar in 12 days. And then, there are the living contaminants, but all good things to those who wait. As the self-cleaning part of the codename suggests, the anomalous attribute of the pool activates autonomously as soon as something or somebody enters. The lights turn on, the jets start pumping, the dual waterfall features start to flow, and if it's in the pool, the cleaning crawler will patrol from side to side of the pool. This is the case even when the pool isn't connected to any kind of external power source. That, I'm afraid, is when things get nasty. While the disappearance of the property owner was certainly a strange occurrence, especially given the other quick departures from the property in the past, it wasn't a definitive answer. But the Foundation's investigation was given an unexpected boon thanks to a disturbing incident recorded on an on-site security camera some time after the homeowner had disappeared. The camera captured a scene straight out of a rom-com, which quickly transitioned into something out of a horror movie. A couple in their early 20s scaled the backyard fence of the property in the middle of the night, perhaps in a state of intoxication. They disrobed and climbed into the pool for some late-night skinny dipping, after obtaining a pair of inflatable rafts from the garden shed. As soon as they entered the pool, the lights, pool jets, and pool crawler activated. At this point, the woman became nervous. But in true horror movie fashion, her male companion told her that there was nothing to worry about. The owner of the house had disappeared. It's not like anyone would really care if they were doing some benign, sexy trespassing to cap off a special date night. After 24 continuous minutes in the pool, the woman began to complain that the water was getting unusually hot and her skin was starting to feel tingly. The man at this point actually agreed. If the two of them had gotten out of the water there and then, their lives likely would have been saved. And who knows what type of relationship they would have gone on to have after that. Maybe they would have gotten married, had kids, found the cure for cancer, and won the Nobel Peace Prize. Who's to say? But that's not what happened. Instead of getting out of the pool, they climbed up onto the rafts and fell asleep, floating together in the water, holding hands. 6 minutes later, both rafts popped, and the couple was dropped into the water below. The water began to bubble and froth, slowly turning red, like a crimson bloom from the location of each of the sunken young lovers. They screamed loudly as the water swamped them, any attempts to escape made futile by their rapid molecular disintegration. Once the water of the pool had gone entirely red, the bubbling stopped. 48 seconds later, the water turned clear, revealing it was now completely empty. No sign of the couple or the burst rafts remained. The Foundation contemplated adding a lifeguard after this. Naturally, when the Foundation encounters an anomaly that has the dual effect of creating incredibly pure water and utterly annihilating any alien matter placed into it, they have a few questions. What are the general properties of the water contained in SCP-242? Does the water retain any SCP-like properties when removed from the location? In other words, they wanted to test whether the water is safe for human consumption, both while in the SCP and outside of it. It's rare that in these files we're given a comprehensive ledger of the equipment used to actually conduct a Foundation experiment, but the file for SCP-242 features a full list of requested equipment in the experiment proposal. This consists of 2 titanium atmospheric dive suits altered to fit the testing criteria, 2 Class D personnel of like gender and race, age range to within 3 years, 1 food-grade titanium barrel 190-liter capacity, and 1 remotely controlled overhead crane capable of lifting 20 metric tons. Stay tuned, there's more.
one automated titanium siphon system, one wireless communication system for separate links to and from both dive suits, and one home fumigation tenting unit used to create a, quote, neighborhood subterfuge. It goes without saying that conducting experiments for the SCP Foundation is both complicated and costly, but let's see if the results justified all this. Test Subject A was put into one of the dive suits and lowered into the pool, where he was instructed to drink from a metal straw that fed into the pool. While this was happening, Test Subject B was instructed to get into the other dive suit. However, he would not be lowered into the pool. Instead, he would drink out of a barrel filled with SCP-242 purified water. Test Subject A shared that he found the water to be incredibly warm and that it had a strange, chemically aftertaste. Test Subject B, on the other hand, reported that the water was cool, tasteless, and immensely refreshing. Strange. Already clear differences were manifesting depending on the water's source. The musings of the scientists were interrupted by a long, loud belch from Test Subject A. It seemed that drinking the water, which he reported as being warmer and more unpleasant to taste than ever, was causing considerable gas buildup in his stomach. Intriguing. The researcher asked each of the test subjects to take another sip from their respective water sources. For Test Subject B, it was still all smooth sailing. The water was cool and refreshing as ever. But when Test Subject B took a sip, he found, to his horror, that it was stinging the inside of his mouth and throat. This led to a coughing fit where he coughed up one of his fillings. That was when the panic started to set in. Test Subject A began to scream and splutter as the diving suit filled with water, coming from the pool, the diving suit itself, and his body. The transmutation had begun, but the most horrifying part was that it wasn't just happening from the outside in, but also the inside out. Test Subject B, on the other hand, was having a pretty wonderful time. For him, this experiment seemed to only entail getting into a weird diving suit and drinking up some refreshing mineral water. The researcher dismissed him from the experiment, saying, "Okay, Test Subject B, we're moving to the next phase, which is a full medical analysis. But you'll need to, decompress before you can exit the suit. It will take several hours, so get comfortable in there. Please take a drink every time the indicator light goes on and let me know if anything changes. Use the urination adapter as needed." To which the shockingly lucky D-Class replied,
Understood. That was easy.
The debrief on the experiment read, "Testing was ended due to internal electrical and subsequent structural failure of atmospheric dive suit A. Retrieval was not attempted. Complete loss of atmospheric dive suit A occurred after approximately 15 hours. Test Subject B was extracted after 17 hours. No physiological changes were detected. Subject B's urine was recovered and showed no extraordinary properties. Subject B has been released to the Class D pool group for future reuse. The water remaining in the barrel was left to evaporate and did so within the expected time frame. No residue of any kind remained. Approvals on further tests for SCP-242 are still pending. Now that the property where SCP-242 is situated is under the command of the Foundation, it's actually relatively easy to keep it under lock and key, giving it the containment class Safe. The New Mexico home is operated just like all the others on its street, with 2 Foundation researchers living there and posing as a married couple, with a Level 1 guard posing as their live-in cook. I don't know about all of you, but I personally think that it would be an excellent premise for a spy family-esque sitcom. And because the Foundation has never been one to let a potentially useful anomaly go to waste, the proposal has been logged to potentially use this anomaly as a way to dispose of other hazardous SCP materials. If this proposal was accepted, it would likely mean that SCP-242 would be reclassified as Thaumiel, but until we have anything official on that, we'll play it safe and stick to safe. Access to the pool is strictly regulated, with D-Class personnel being the only ones allowed into the water, and even then, only during heavily regulated testing periods. It's best to follow the Foundation containment procedures on this one, folks. This is one pool that you don't want to dip your toe into. Well, if you want to keep your toe, anyway.
The High Priest, adorned in the finest purple ceremonial robes, stands before the great, bull-headed statue in the darkened belly of the castle. The year is 850 CE. Masked worshippers whisper chants of holy reverence on all sides. He is in his element. Everything they do in service of the great god Moloch. All around them, banners bearing the sigil of the Brazen Heart hang. It's a celebration. Just a few hours earlier, their forces had invaded an enemy church in the hills. They'd slaughtered most of the congregation in a sudden whirlwind of bloody violence, staining their swords in the great Moloch's name. But as the high priest had ordered, some of these blaspheming Christian churchgoers were taken prisoner and brought back to the castle for questioning. Here, the high priest would deal with them himself. A sadistic, tooth-bearing grin crosses his face at the very thought of it. Soon after the ceremony, the high priest descends into the dungeon, which he'd taken with a certain flourish to calling the game room. Here he keeps his private collection of torture tools from around the world, each of which he takes great pleasure in using against the worms who refuse to bend the knee to his bloodthirsty god. In the game room, the air is suffused with the stink of blood and sweat. The prisoners who still have tongues start to scream when the high priest enters, knowing that everything is about to get so much worse for them. He's cultivated a certain reputation as a man willing to do anything to ensure the superiority of his infamous cult, the Brazen Heart. If ever you fell into his terrible clutches, escape was out of the question. The very best you could possibly hope for was a mercifully quick death. In the corner of the room, one unfortunate captive was twisted and shattered against a breaking wheel, but still torturously alive. In the corner across from him, another prisoner bleeds from the inside of a grimacing Iron Maiden that the high priest had overseen the construction of personally. But that was only the very beginning of the high priest's collection of terrible instruments. Prisoners teeter in agony on Judas cradles and Spanish donkeys. Skin is stretched and bones are cracked on racks. Some are pierced as they sit on the monstrous iron chair, while others simmer away in great vats of oil. Some scream as they hang from their wrists on the 10th round of strappado. Lead sprinklers, Spanish ticklers, thumb screws, crocodile shears, choke pears, melee boots, heretics' forks, bastinado sticks, scolds' bridles, scavengers' daughters. The high priest has all of them, and he's adept at using them. But they all pale in comparison to his favorite piece, a prized possession, gifted from the bosom of Moloch himself, the Liar's Cradle. Such a perfectly ingenious tool for physical pain and mental terror, it's positioned at the very center of the game room, just so every other prisoner in every other device can see him using it and know that it's their eventual fate. A mighty stone furnace with huge metal grates on either side. As the high priest approaches, he can see a terrified prisoner already writhing within the machine. When the prisoner sees him, the fear only gets worse. The high priest would have no mercy for him. He'd spent 10 hours on the breaking wheel before this, and that felt like a pleasant sleep in a comfy king-sized bed compared to what he was about to endure. Two of the high priest's sadistic acolytes jab at him through the grates with red-hot pokers. The high priest grins and asks the prisoner what village he hails from. When the villager surrenders the information, the high priest gives a sagely nod. He asks how old the prisoner is, and the prisoner says 27. Again, the high priest nods. He asks the prisoner whether he would like to leave and be with his family again, and of course, the prisoner replies yes. He has no idea that they're all already dead. The high priest smiles and says, "Just one more question then, and you'll be free to go. What is my true name?" The prisoner pauses for a moment, which earns them another jab with the poker. He tells the high priest that he doesn't know. He's jabbed again and again and again. He begins to cry and starts apologizing. He doesn't know the high priest's true name. How could he possibly tell him, no matter how much he's tormented? The high priest says, "Well, just give me your best guess. Who knows? Perhaps you'll be lucky." The game room falls silent, all eyes on the prisoner in the Liar's Cradle. His lip trembles, knowing from the dark legends what will happen when he answers. He breathes a ragged sigh, accepts his fate, and guesses incorrectly. Suddenly, the prisoner screams as he catches fire. The high priest watches with unrestrained glee as the prisoner burns. He does so for around a minute, the fire burning far more intensely than it possibly should have. By the time it's done, the pile of ashes that was once the prisoner falls through the grate in the bottom of the Liar's Cradle. The high priest turns to the rest of the room and asks, "Who's next?" Of all the many adjectives you could use to describe SCP-2128, also known as the Liar's Cradle, humane certainly isn't high on the list. This antique stone furnace was discovered deep in the dungeons of an undisclosed castle, believed to be a former refuge of a fringe occultic group known as the Brazen Heart, a cult of worshippers of the Canaanite deity Moloch, an entity mentioned several times in the Hebrew Bible. Among the deity's most notable traits is its bull-like appearance and the fact it requests burned human sacrifices. This feels extremely relevant, given the fact that the Liar's Cradle is all about giving its victims a fiery end. While the thaumaturgic methods used by members of the Brazen Hand to create the Liar's Cradle is unknown, what is clear are the cradle's capabilities and functions. When a human being is placed within the cradle and asked questions, a single lie will lead to them being anomalously incinerated. And the device's purview for a lie is frighteningly wide. A victim will be incinerated if something they say is factually untrue, regardless of the victim's personal knowledge. In other words, ignorance as an excuse will not save you. While the Brazen Heart was wiped out hundreds of years ago by soldiers of the Spanish Inquisition, the SCP Foundation has been able to glean some background information about the Liar's Cradle from a surviving document, a sheepskin scroll known as the Ignis Manuscript. This revealed that the cradle was invented around the 9th century CE, before being walled up in 1021 CE, and during its heyday, it was used as a torture device by Brazen Hand members against their enemies. While most torture is actually incredibly ineffective at getting information, studies have shown that under states of extreme duress, victims will simply say what they believe their captors want to hear in order to make the suffering stop. The Liar's Cradle is an excellent method of wringing information out of captives. Well, aside from the fact that one lie means the captive is immediately reduced to ashes. You see, SCP-2128 works on a true or false binary operating system that seems to imply an innate awareness of all knowledge. If you have enough captives to burn and know the right deductive or inductive questions to ask, it's possible to know almost anything in enough time. It's believed the Brazen Heart used the Liar's Cradle both for practical purposes and their own twisted amusement. Victims would be placed in the device and have their feet prodded with hot pokers while they were asked a series of increasingly probing questions about their life, being forced to divulge extremely dark and personal secrets or meet their doom on the pyre. It was a depraved combination of physical and mental torture. If even hearing about all this makes you feel a little queasy, nobody could blame you for that. The SCP Foundation, however, looked at the Liar's Cradle and saw incredible potential. As mentioned earlier, the Liar's Cradle bases its judgment on raw factual knowledge, not the knowledge of its particular victims, so anyone with enough people to burn can conceivably work their way towards discovering any binary answer. And given that the SCP Foundation has an almost unlimited number of D-Class personnel at their disposal, it didn't take long for them to realize all the knowledge that was up for grabs. They just need to make a few sacrifices along the way, hoping to save more people in the long run. Moloch himself would probably be proud. It was this somewhat morally dubious chain of thought that led to the creation of Experimental Protocol 37 Sparafusel, the Foundation's plan to utilize the Liar's Cradle to discover more information that would assist in their mission to contain anomalies and protect the human race. The protocol is outlined in a 5-step procedure that is as follows. 1. One D-Class employee, referred to as the Messenger, will be laid inside SCP-2128. 2. The Messenger will repeat statements as instructed from the prepared list. 3. After each statement, if the Messenger remains unharmed, the statement is to be marked as true. 4. As soon as the Messenger is incinerated, a new Messenger is to be provided. The statement that triggered the incineration is to be marked as false. 5. A new Messenger will be assigned. Repeat as needed. While the total extent of these tests remains off the record, the official files on SCP-2128 have some fascinating supplementals about some of the results of Experimental Protocol 37 Sparafusel. The first set of tests was designated EP-37 Sparafusel-22, Keter Checkup, and was conducted on January 10, 2014. The messenger in this case was D-6238. The first statement this D-Class was fed was, "The human race is in danger of extinction right now." Seeing as D-6238 didn't immediately go up in flames, this was found to be true. The second statement was, "The danger comes from an item in Foundation custody." Much to the relief of the D-Class, this was also found to be true, and he lived to make another statement. This statement was, "The dangerous item in question is located at a site in North America." This was, sadly, the D-Class's last words, as this statement proved to be false, and he was immediately burned to death for his troubles. The next messenger brought in was a woman now known as D6239, after she committed an armed robbery that killed several innocents and landed her on death row. Her statement was, "The dangerous item in question is located at a site in Europe." This caused her to be immediately incinerated. The SCP Foundation then continued to narrow their focus on this matter over the next 13 D-classes. With the information they gained, they were able to narrow down that SCP-752, a subspecies of humans who are eager to displace and replace non-anomalous humanity, would be the cause of a containment breach that could potentially end the human race's dominance if they weren't stopped. D6253 was given the statement, SCP-752 will breach containment within the next month. The answer was true. Next came SCP-752 will breach containment within the next week. Also, this proved to be true. D6253 would finally meet their maker with the false statement, SCP-752 will breach containment tomorrow. But this opened the door for the final correct answer delivered to us by D6254, that SCP-752 will breach containment today. Armed with this vital information in the nick of time, the Foundation dispatched MTF Nu 7, also known as Hammer Down, their largest and most well-armed mobile task force, to the site in question. This quick thinking allowed them to quell the threat at the exact right time and save the world from an SK-class dominance shift scenario that would have left humanity in the dust. Using the Liar's Cradle, the SCP Foundation had just saved the world as we know it, and all it had taken was a handful of D-class lives. So naturally, the tests with the Liar's Cradle didn't stop there. Next came EP-37 Sparafusel-23, Knowledge Measure. As the name suggests, this test hoped to ascertain the extent of the knowledge the Liar's Cradle possessed, seeing as it could continue to come in handy for Foundation purposes. The first messenger was D7784, who was fed the statement, SCP-2128 knows everything. This turned out to be false and led to the D-class's immediate incineration. However, the lead researcher on the case decided to take a different approach. Perhaps, he thought, the Liar's Cradle didn't accept the numerical designation that the Foundation had placed on it. The next messenger, D7785, led with the statement, the Liar's Cradle knows everything, which proved true, because that allowed him to live long enough to be incinerated by his next statement, the Liar's Cradle will tell us everything. After his incineration, D7786 stepped up to the metaphorical plate, first saying, the Liar's Cradle will tell me everything I need to know. The Cradle judged this to be true. It did not, however, take kindly to, the Liar's Cradle will tell the Foundation everything they need to know. It declared this statement false by immediately incinerating the D-class. After this incineration, the EP-37 Sparafusel project was out of its daily allotted D-classes and decided to call it a night. Their next test was the mysterious and controversial EP-37 Sparafusel-24 Sunday School song, which utilized D7891 as its messenger. She was fed the statement, Jesus loves the little children, all the children of the world. The results of this particular test have been permanently expunged from SCP Foundation records. Next came EP-37 Sparafusel-25 Pinocchio Paradox, which was an experiment intended to see how the Liar's Cradle would react to logical paradoxes. Spoilers, it doesn't involve as much incineration as you might expect. First came D8232, who provided the statement, telling the Liar's Cradle a paradox is dangerous to Foundation personnel. This was proven to be false, and ironically, he was burned alive immediately. Next came D8233 with the statement, the Liar's Cradle is going to kill me right now. The Liar's Cradle bent its own rules by declaring this false, but only incinerating the D-class enough to permanently disfigure him rather than killing him. D8234 was shoved into the cradle after that, making the statement, the Liar's Cradle is going to burn me right now. This was proven through empirical observation to be false. 10 seconds passed without incineration. However, when D8234 exited the cradle, he complained about sustaining a small cut on one of the rocks that made the cradle while climbing out of it. This caused D8234 to rapidly succumb to a previously undiscovered form of gangrene and pass away in minutes. Finally, D8235 entered and said, the Liar's Cradle is going to inflict physical harm upon me right now. This was proven false, and D8235 climbed out of the Liar's Cradle unharmed. At this point, however, he began to cry and scream out the word, goodbye, before dying via altogether more unpleasant means that I don't wish to discuss in great detail here. The last experiment we have on record here is EP-37 Sparafusel-26, Subjective Opinion, which intended to see if the Liar's Cradle liked to turn logical gray areas into logical charred black areas. Messenger 1, D9224, made the relatively uncontroversial statement, "Golden retrievers are cute." The Cradle seemed to disagree, immediately incinerating him. The next messenger, D9225, delivered the counterpoint, "Golden retrievers are ugly." And just like that, he was up in smoke. However, when Messenger 3, D9226, delivered the wildcard statement, "Golden retrievers are tasty," everyone in attendance was surprised to find the Liar's Cradle completely agreed with this. When D9226 delivered the completely understandable reaction, "Wait, what? That's freaking nasty," he was immediately reduced to ashes by the Cradle's flames. With this line of questioning concluded in the strangest manner possible, the new messenger, D9227, was brought in. Before becoming a member of D-Class personnel, his name was Stephen Kemp, a cannibalistic serial killer who'd murdered and eaten 14 women before being captured, tried, and put on death row for his crimes. He delivered the statement, "I'm a good person." Surprisingly, the Cradle felt this was true and let him live. However, when Stephen decided to get cocky and chime in with, "Joke's on you, jackasses, apparently I'm Mother Teresa," he was immediately incinerated due to the fact that he was not, in fact, Mother Teresa. His ashes were soon accompanied by that of D9228, who made the statement, "The Liar's Cradle is sometimes incorrect," before being burned to death. Next came D9229, who allowed for the longest streak of unbroken statements in the history of tests performed on the Liar's Cradle. He said, "The Liar's Cradle speaks only infallible empirical truth." True. He said, "The Liar's Cradle is hungry." True. He said, "The Liar's Cradle's hunger can never be satiated, no matter how full it becomes." True. He said, "The Liar's Cradle would like to incinerate me right now." True. He said, "The Liar's Cradle is growing impatient." True. He said, "The Liar's Cradle sees delicious, warm meat on its plate and would very much like to be fed." True. He said, "The Liar's Cradle is angry that it is continually denied its meat." True. He said, "People meat is delicious." True. He said, "I am delicious." True. He said, "My skin is warm." True. He said, "The crackling of fire upon boiling drips of fat and rapidly cauterizing flesh gives the Liar's Cradle pleasure." True. After such an incredible streak that also allowed for a frightening insight into the apparent personality of the Liar's Cradle, D9229 was withdrawn alive. He was replaced by D9230, who said, "The Earth is round," and was immediately incinerated. It's widely believed that this outcome came from the Liar's Cradle maliciously interpreting Earth as dirt, rather than the planet Earth, just so it could incinerate the subject. Just because the Liar's Cradle is largely objective doesn't mean it isn't incredibly petty, it would seem. Because of the static nature of SCP-2128, it has been given the rare, safe object class. Containment Site 403 has been built around the castle that currently holds SCP-2128, and a healthy supply of D-Class personnel is regularly siphoned off for EP-37 Sparafusel. The sadistic sorcerers of the Brazen Heart may be long gone, but in a strange and disturbing twist of fate, the researchers of the SCP Foundation are keeping the spirit of their work alive even today. Now go and watch another entry from the files of DrBob, like SCP-987, The Gruesome Gallery, for another terrifying anomalous object that reveals some terrifying truths. And make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss a single anomaly as we delve further and further into the SCP Foundation's classified archives.